It was October 15th, 2019, when Elvis Presley stepped into Biosite 66 of the SCP Foundation, 42 years after his death. The confused rock and roll star slammed into the ground in front of a large group of researchers who were taking vigorous notes. A glowing silver screen playing one of the live tapings of his concerts flickered behind him. And if all this wasn't strange enough, Elvis was naked and completely devoid of color. And we don't mean that he was pale after the startling experience of being resurrected from the dead. We mean his entire body was completely monochrome, as though he'd just walked out of a black and white movie.
"Oh, Mama," the king said. "Where am I? This don't make no kind of sense."
He wasn't provided an answer. Instead, a pair of guards helped him to his feet and wrapped a monogrammed bathrobe around him to protect his dignity. Some of the researchers, who just happened to be big Elvis fans, tried to hide their disappointment with a sense of detached scientific professionalism. None of them had spent much time contemplating the murky ethics of pulling one of the greatest musicians in American history out of the embrace of death and back into the world of the living. After all, it couldn't really be said to be their fault, could it? It was their job to test SCP-806. And if that test meant forcibly resurrecting the king, then so be it. Elvis was taken to a nearby interview chamber where Dr. Bridge, one of the project leads, was preparing to interview him. After requesting that Elvis sign the cases of a few of his greatest hits vinyls, he commenced with an interview. He wanted to see whether this colorless simulacra of one of Americana's most central figures remembered much of the life his counterpart had lived. At first, it seemed that Elvis preferred a little less conversation and a little more action as he attempted to escape the chamber using his well-practiced karate skill before being subdued by guards. After these guards administered a mild sedative and gave him a bacon deluxe and a large milkshake purchased from a Burger King not far from the site, he became a lot more amenable to questioning.
"Oh,
he said Elvisly.
Now you Foundation fellas seem like some pretty hip cats, but I don't think I can help much in whatever it is you do here."
Dr. Bridge assured Elvis that if he was able to answer some basic questions about the events of his life, then he'd be of immense help to the Foundation's goals. Dr. Bridge asked about his place of birth, his upbringing, his military service, and some of the high points in his music career. Dr. Bridge seemed oddly hurried in a way that made Elvis feel nervous, but he was able to answer the questions accurately, a fact that seemed to relieve the researcher.
"Now listen here, I think you owe me an explanation," he said. "If you're hoping that locking me up in here in some clever way to get me to perform jailhouse rock, then you've gotta—"
His breath hitched in his throat, as though the next word simply failed to form. Dr. Bridge, a lifelong Elvis fan, sighed. He knew exactly what was coming next, as it had so many times before. Elvis immediately rose to his feet, eyes wide with horror, backing away from the table. He would have said something like, "What have you done to me?" if his tongue wasn't already melting in his mouth like cotton candy. He let out a gurgling scream as his body lost its structural integrity, melting down to the ground as the burbling wreckage of the king's golden voice screamed for absolution in drowned nonsense words. Moments later, he was little more than a giant gray puddle on the testing room floor. If you were to do a chemical test on this unpleasant slop, you'd find that it was mostly human blood and the kind of graphite you'd see in pencil leads. 2 guards entered with mops to clean it all up. Elvis, it seemed, had left the building. But unlike the rest of the world, thanks to being in possession of SCP-806, the Foundation could bring him back any time they wanted. Dr. Bridge capped off his Elvis notes and turned to a research assistant.
"Dig out the reels of Some Like It Hot and How to Marry a Millionaire. I've always wanted to speak to Marilyn Monroe."
SCP-806 is not these necromantic silver screen stars of yesteryear. Those are SCP-806-1. 806 itself is actually the movie projector that makes their stories come to life, metaphorically and literally. When the right footage is placed inside the machine and it's pointed to a classic silver-backed cinema screen, it will create a perfect monochrome copy of a deceased person depicted in that movie. Interestingly, the person will be monochrome whether or not the footage was, though flesh and organs removed from dead, resurrected copies will slowly regain color before quickly decaying. They found that out doing an autopsy of a cloned Marlon Brando. As for the hardware itself, the projector appears to have been built in the year 1900 and then extensively modified over time. Its lenses have been taken out and replaced by ones made of unidentified anomalous minerals, cut incredibly fine, as though designed to reflect reality itself. The original filament bulb has been switched with a more powerful LED array, and the inner mechanisms have been wholesale removed and replaced by more modern fixtures made out of a number of complex alloys. The result is that while the original projector was only designed to play 35mm film, SCP-806 can be adjusted to play any kind of film stock. This has, needless to say, massively increased the Foundation's potential for conducting experiments using it. And sometimes, it seems the very potential had been abused to dark and selfish ends. It was imperative to see whether creation still had the skills as well as the memories of the originals. So, Dr. Bridge brought back the legendary comedian Chris Farley, after being assured that nothing was strange about his situation, was made to perform a full stand-up set for the research team and guards. Everyone reported that the whole thing was extremely funny, until Farley destabilized and sluiced off stage in liquid form, making the front row an impromptu splash zone. In seeing whether the anomaly could be used to find out the answers to mysteries lost to time, they used hours upon hours of newsreel footage of Jimmy Hoffa to resurrect the infamously missing American Union leader. Researchers asked him if he could tell them who exactly killed him the first time around. After processing the distressing information that he was, in fact, dead, he tried his best to recall what had happened before, but the answer wasn't all that satisfying to anyone there. He claimed that the last thing he remembered was hearing footsteps behind him and the sound of a hammer being pulled back on a pistol. Everything after that was a mystery. What we can say definitively is that Jimmy Hoffa's double died of a heart attack after around 30 hours after being brought back to the land of the living in his strange cinematic form. After raging debates about whether it was in poor taste to bring back a copy of a celebrity who had died only 20 years earlier, Dr. Bridge ended the discussion by announcing that everything about the anomaly was in extremely poor taste, so they should all stop worrying about it. Using old episodes of Croc Files converted into film, they brought back naturalist and TV personality Steve Irwin, asked him to say a number of things in his amusing Australian accent, and then watched him die of a cardiac event. Jesus. As you've likely noticed, another commonality between the creations of SCP-806, the 806-1 instances, is that almost all of them seem to have deeply unpleasant ends, much like the celebrities and media figures whose lives the anomaly had a tendency to yank, screaming and confusing from the void. Only one of them has survived for any reasonable amount of time. More on her unique case very soon, but for the most part, none are likely to survive more than 75 hours. While some unstable cases have gruesome and spectacular deaths where their bodies physically melt into the anomalous matter that SCP-806 had woven them into existence from, most have had a more mundane but no less distressing demise, dying of fatal heart attacks. This is particularly uncomfortable when the person who's been given this twisted and extremely transient second life was felled by a heart attack in the first place, a not uncommon thing in the stressful celebrity lifestyle. Dr. Bridge, a lifelong music fan as it turned out, brought back Beatles frontman John Lennon in order to ask him some questions about the recording of Abbey Road. All for the sake of the Foundation and the betterment of mankind, of course. Getting Lennon to sign the sleeve of his vintage copy of The White Album was also, in Dr. Bridge's own words, to make sure that the memory and motor functions of the copies were effective enough to realistically recreate the signatures of their deceased real-life counterparts. Sure. As with any anomaly, the effort to understand its many quirks and contours can take you down some strange paths. Dr. Crumb's attempt to use an original copy of the film reels of 1996 classic Space Jam yielded no results, as basketball legend Michael Jordan is, as of this video's production, still alive, and the anomaly can only create copies of people who are already deceased. While it was valuable for the Foundation to find out, it wasn't actually the purpose of Dr. Crumb's test. He was hoping to manifest a physical version of Lola Bunny, the female anthropomorphic rabbit character, for reasons unknown. This was a fool's errand for two additional reasons, as it turns out. Firstly, the anomaly doesn't reproduce cartoon characters or non-humans. Only deceased human beings can be reproduced, and in the case of fiction, it will only bring back the actor, not the character they played. Additionally, in film reels with multiple characters, the anomaly seems to default to whatever person had the most screen time. This is why selecting a more specific moment and looping it for the required amount of time is often the most effective way to manifest the desired resurrection from SCP-806 when there are multiple dead performers in a single piece. Such is the case when you pick a film old enough that nobody in it is still alive. In case you were wondering, 13 to 27 hours of footage are required in order for the projector to have enough to work with. In the absence of that much footage existing naturally, repetition and clever editing tricks are required to bring home the desired result. The Foundation needed to employ this method multiple times during testing. Of course, an anomaly like this doesn't just happen. It has to be created meticulously and with incredible resolve. You'd be forgiven for thinking that perhaps this was the work of Are We Cool Yet?, the an-artist collective whose raison d'etre is using the forces of the anomalous to create boundary-pushing artworks across a number of mediums. With the help of a projector like this, they could resurrect art legends like Andy Warhol and Marcel Duchamp to assist in, or at least provide feedback on their latest creations. That would indeed be logical, but sometimes you defeat yourself when looking for logic in the anomalous. Even for the SCP Foundation, Occam's razor still applies. The explanation with the fewest assumptions is usually the correct one. With SCP-806, the real answer is far simpler and far more tragic than any kind of grand artistic intent. Like many anomalies, SCP-806 was actually discovered by complete accident. Agent Fisher, working undercover as a police officer in a small town precinct, happened to be assigned the job of investigating a local movie theater after reports of kids breaking in and causing trouble. Of course, when he arrived at the theater, that is very much not what he found. Instead, he discovered SCP-806-1-A, a unique specimen in that she's the only anomaly created by this object that is still, against all odds, alive today. She's a young woman, monochromatic like all the others, but strangely, she isn't any kind of celebrity or public figure. In fact, despite searching extensively, the Foundation hasn't been able to find any records of who this woman was when she was alive. The woman herself hasn't been of any assistance in this line of inquiry either, because she suffers from a form of dissociative amnesia that blocks off any memories of who she once was. Agent Fisher's situation report also showed that the woman wasn't the only one who was there when he arrived at the movie theater. There was also a thus far unidentified male person of interest who was frantically shouting at the woman, likely a non-anomalous human based on his non-monochromatic color scheme. He was trying to gather the woman up in his arms and convince her to run with him, but she was in a clear state of distress, seemingly having no idea who this man was. Not knowing what exactly he should do in a situation like this, Agent Fisher drew his service weapon and instructed the two to freeze. The man, who seemed incredibly panicked, turned and ran away after a moment's hesitation, leaving the woman confused and alone. Not long after that, Mobile Task Force Alpha 4, known as Pony Express, were called in to collect SCP-806, the woman, and approximately 50 different film reels being kept at the theater, in case they had some sort of inherent anomalous property. In case you were wondering, the film playing on SCP-806 when it was confiscated was some kind of home movie, with a woman whose appearance matched the amnesiac anomalous entity exactly. She was simply staring at the camera while standing on a beach, smiling with a twinkle in her eye, laughing to herself and saying, "I love you," to the unseen camera person, the footage looping on for hours and hours and hours. Dr. Bethany Moore was exhausted. She'd been pulling an all-nighter to digitize some old files about SCP-2317, the door to another world, and she could feel herself nodding off, little by little as the night drew on. For Dr. Moore, it'd been a whole week of long days. Something even worse when you work at a job as stressful as being a researcher for the SCP Foundation, and the exertion was starting to catch up with her. At around 2:30 a.m., she sighed, rolled back her office chair, and decided to take a quick break to grab a coffee and refuel. If she didn't get some pretty hardcore caffeine in her over the next few minutes, she was absolutely going to pass out on her keyboard.
The fact that the rooms in the facility were kept at a relatively low light at this time of night to save power really wasn't helping her fatigue. Dr. Moore dragged herself down to the break room, too tired and too focused on her work to notice that things were eerily quiet. She was punching in her order for the largest espresso available when she noticed the quiet sound of footsteps approaching her from behind. Slow, methodical, and unsettling, especially at this kind of hour. She turned and felt an immense relief wash over her. It was just Security Officer Chuck Walker, one of the regular guards at this site. Dr. Moore and Security Officer Walker weren't exactly best friends, but they'd crossed paths on the job on numerous occasions, and they'd always been polite, friendly, and cordial anytime they'd directly interacted. "Hey, Chuck," she said while her coffee began to pour into the less than environmentally friendly styrofoam cup behind her. "Long night. Working hard or hardly working, huh?" Security Officer Walker didn't respond. It was only now that Dr. Moore seemed to register just how dark the break room was. Really, the only source of light was the soft glow coming from the coffee machine itself. But light or no light, she could see something was wrong with Walker. His eyes seemed oddly distant, like he wasn't even looking at her. He was looking through her, off into some unknown place. Dr. Moore cleared her throat. "Everything okay, Cha?" Before she could even finish her sentence, Chuck's hands were clasped around her throat. The movement was so sudden and violent. Her back was shoved up against the coffee machine, spilling the espresso everywhere. She tried to scream, but she couldn't get enough air. Chuck squeezed. His grip was like an iron around her thin neck. She silently gasped and spluttered as he choked her, still maintaining that glassy, almost dead look in his eye. Like doing this meant absolutely nothing to him. As things started to go dark, Dr. Moore's thoughts were naturally along the lines of, "Why is he doing this to me?" And that's exactly when she got her answer. There were two eyes that seemed almost to be floating in the darkness behind Security Officer Walker, staring with equal indifference at this sudden and awful display of meaningless violence. She could only just make out the slender shape of the creature's mostly obsidian body, with the occasional patch of white. It was her. It all made sense now. It all made so much sense. The daughter of Snap. Dr. Moore's neck broke, leaving her last thought forever unfinished. Security Officer Walker loosened his grip, allowing Dr. Moore's body to slump to the ground. He turned to his mistress for approval, but she didn't say a word. She just left the room, and he obediently followed. This was the very first casualty of a containment breach that would go on to claim the lives of 43 members of SCP Foundation personnel. Several male members of the staff experienced what can only be described as a descent into violent insanity, turning on fellow members of personnel and committing murder, largely through the act of strangulation. A female mobile task force was brought in to deal with this rapidly escalating situation. The brainwashed staff members were relatively easy to neutralize, given the superior training of the MTF compared to on-site staff. But the being that did this to them would be a considerably more challenging foe. SCP-029, the Daughter of Shadows, an extremely violent and dangerous Keter-class anomaly. She was still loose on the site, and that meant nobody was safe. The MTF prowled the hallways in three-person squads, while another small detachment headed to the maintenance and security rooms. They couldn't rely on the on-site guards for any help on this one, considering half the brainwashed murderers they just terminated had formerly been site guards. One of the squads finally encountered SCP-029 in a dark hallway and engaged her in violent combat. The Daughter of Shadows is an incredibly formidable opponent. She's significantly stronger than a non-anomalous human being. She's highly resistant to most forms of damage, and her reflexes are around 4 times faster than some of the fastest recorded non-anomalous human reflexes. In other words, she can shrug off bullets and seems to be one of the world's most proficient stranglers. You really don't want to have to engage with SCP-029 in a physical fight. One of the 3 MTF operatives attempting to subdue SCP-029 was already dead. Her neck practically caved in from the force of a squeeze when the lights finally came back on. While the Foundation didn't know a great deal about the Daughter of Shadows, they were aware of one thing. Her anomalous powers were significantly weakened when faced with bright light. The operatives in the maintenance and security rooms had turned up the lights in the hallway to their maximum brightness, stunning the Daughter of Shadows just long enough for the mobile task force to converge and, through their combined strength and resources, subdue and contain the creature again. She was swiftly delivered back to her high-security containment chamber and locked away once more. The containment chamber is sealed with a triple airlock, and powerful floodlights on the walls keep the creature in a constant state of stark illumination. A truly foolish mistake by Security Officer Walker, who'd been shot to death not even an hour prior by the mobile task force, had caused this particularly deadly containment breach. Ignoring very specific Foundation containment protocols out of his own sense of foolish, morbid curiosity, he'd strayed too close to SCP-029's containment chamber and been dragged into her terrible thrall. Considering the vast array of potential world or even universe enders on the SCP Foundation's roster, SCP-029 is far from the most dangerous anomaly out there, but she's proven time and time again to be one of the most problematic to contain. And due to her incredibly violent temperament and dangerous anomalous abilities, every time SCP-029 does breach containment, a lot of innocent Foundation employees are bound to die. The Daughter of Shadows, a self-given name that seems to be inspired by the fact her skin pigmentation is 80% true black, has a seemingly unquenchable bloodlust. Though ironically, she despises the actual shedding of blood. SCP-029 has been shown to be capable of improvising a weapon out of almost any object. Truly the MacGyver of murder, but she will always kill in a manner that causes no blood to be spilled, hence her preference for strangulation. She also has the ability to brainwash male victims into committing murder on her behalf, by making them believe that she is some form of goddess. Despite showing clear sentience and sound tactical reasoning, it's impossible to reason with the Daughter of Shadows, as she has no compassion or better judgment to appeal to. Her requests for a bed, a blanket, some books, and some clothes have all been denied, due to the pretty justifiable belief that all of these requests are just a pretense to get security lowered around her. This harsh treatment actually led to an official complaint by Dr. Erica Brodeen. It stated, "This is ridiculous. The girl can't even have clothes. We are not animals. Let her cover herself." Dr. Sophia Light posted an official reply saying, "Dr. Bodine, you are granted permission to deliver clothes to SCP-029. Life sadly punished Dr. Bodine for her compassion. The Daughter of Shadows murdered her with the very clothes she brought in to keep it warm, and the tape of her grisly death is now used as an educational tool for anyone assigned to SCP-029. A grim reminder of the real and present danger that the creature poses to anyone in its vicinity. Because of the nature of the anomaly and her abilities, the Foundation takes a very hands-off approach to interacting with her. Guards are posted outside, and not even food is brought into the chamber, as SCP-029 seems to be able to survive just fine without it. At this point, you're probably wondering, what is this thing really? And how did the SCP Foundation find it in the first place? We'll tell you all we can about that, but be warned. SCP-029 is also linked to one of the darkest things the Foundation has ever needed to do in the pursuit of keeping an anomaly contained. It all began with what seemed like an incredibly random assault on Agent Ramachandran, an SCP Foundation field operative stationed in rural India. The assailant attempted to strangle Agent Ramachandran before being quickly subdued. Because of the strangeness of the event, the agent began a weeks-long investigation into who the man was and why he'd commit this attack. That sent Agent Ramachandran down a frightening rabbit hole towards a small but incredibly violent local cult. The men claimed to be Thuggies, a historically frightening group of roving robbers and murderers who terrorized parts of India throughout its long history. And what's more, this particular sect of thugs seemed to worship the Daughter of Shadows as a kind of earthbound demigod. They believed that if they made 1 million sacrifices to the violence-loving entity, it would bring about the end of the world. However, they also believed that only sacrifices committed via strangulation would count towards their million-soul total. The Foundation amassed a small invasion force to infiltrate and take down their mountainside fortress from within. Naturally, they were met with considerable violent resistance, which sadly caused the death of Agent Ramachandran, the very reason we were able to locate the Daughter of Shadows in the first place. But in the end, the Foundation prevailed. The Thuggies were either slaughtered or repelled, and the Foundation operatives discovered SCP-029 within the temple, along with a huge number of corpses believed to be the cult's prior victims. Given how dark it was inside the temple, the Daughter of Shadows was a formidable level of power. She killed and brainwashed several of the agents who attempted to contain her, but was eventually subdued and transported back to the nearest secure containment site. One of the most infamous incidents that SCP-029 is associated with happened around 7 years after her capture. The level of dark pigmentation on her skin was beginning to increase, prompting concern among researchers. When they asked her what was happening, she simply said that her followers were on the move again, prompting concern that 029's thuggy cult was due for another resurgence. Knowing how dangerous this cult could be, the SCP Foundation decided that drastic action would be needed to deal with them this time. When they eventually located members of the cult, they began tracking them and gathering intelligence. They discovered that a mass gathering of the entire cult was imminent, on a day that they believed to be holy. The Foundation waited until then to strike. When the cult was gathered in worship, the Foundation conducted an aerial strike, killing them all in an instant. The second this happened, the Daughter of Shadows sat bolt upright and screamed for several hours, mourning the death of her beloved followers. She learned a hard lesson that day. While she and her methods were undeniably brutal, when the situation called for it, the SCP Foundation could be plenty brutal as well. Since this incident, SCP-029 has increased her efforts to escape, perhaps so she can get the jump on building a brand new cult. You're on a road trip, the kind that stretches over days on end, and you need to make multiple stops along the way to refuel the car and yourself. The last time you remember stopping to get more gas and a bite to eat was back in Wyoming, and now you're in the heart of Montana. Thankfully, like an oasis in the desert, you see the town of Clearwater off in the distance. It's a vibrant, welcoming little place, a perfect slice of classic small-town Americana. You took a similar trip last year, and vaguely remember stopping at Clearwater that time too, and you're glad to be back. In particular, you remember the Old Prairie Diner, a folksy little place with the most delicious huckleberry pie you ever tasted. Perhaps it's about time for you to give it another try. You fill up your tank and stop at the diner. The food tastes just as good as you remember, but one thing is off. The entire staff seems to have changed. It is the exact same diner you ate at a year ago, no doubt about that, but it looks like everyone from the waitstaff to the cashier to the cooks have all been replaced. You try your best not to think about it. After all, businesses are allowed to replace their staff, but the longer you sit in the diner, the more uncomfortable the feelings become. You need to ask someone, just to push away the fears that you're not going crazy. When the waiter passes by, you compliment the food and mention you ate here last year too. You asked the unfamiliar waiter if they had worked here back then. They confirm that yes, they've always worked here, and so has everybody else. The diner is a family business. You leave town not too long after that, feeling vaguely unsettled. And as a voice on the radio warns about the incoming rain, you tell yourself that you never want to return to the town of Clearwater, Montana. As you leave, the memory of the town seems to fade from your mind in real time. But little do you know, the people of Clearwater will never be able to leave, ever. It's because something horrifying will happen in Clearwater every single year, and that thing is known to the SCP Foundation as SCP-3300. This annual anomalous event is Clearwater's own local curse, always occurring around mid-June. While many of the mechanics of this event still elude the Foundation's understanding, the outcome is well documented. Every single inhabitant of the town is replaced by a person who didn't previously exist. While some elements may carry over from their original counterparts, every person involved will simply be a whole new person, with no memories of the change or who they once were. The process known as SCP-3300 lasts between 6 and 18 days, and once the process has begun, it's impossible for any outsiders to intervene. It begins with rain, a light, dreary drizzle at first, but each day the rain gets worse. Soon it's a storm, and then a maelstrom. Flooding, hurricanes, tornadoes, all centered around Clearwater but cutting off neatly just beyond it. What happens in Clearwater remains in Clearwater, and when the process has concluded and the sun shines once more, everybody has been changed. Whenever the Foundation has tried to send personnel or equipment into Clearwater during SCP-3300, one of two things has happened. In the more favorable scenarios, those attempting to enter Clearwater have simply appeared on the other side of the city limits. In the less positive instances, personnel and equipment have been lost forever within. There is no stopping or even understanding SCP-3300. According to Foundation records, Clearwater has been around at least as long as the Foundation itself, perhaps even longer. Clearwater has been able to undergo its yearly nightmare without intrusion due to a unique cognitohazardous effect, which creates a kind of mental block around memories of the town for outsiders. You won't forget Clearwater per se, but you will find it increasingly hard to focus on, like something you can only ever see out of the corner of your eye. There is no saving the people of Clearwater. The horror will play out again and again and again. The Foundation has no first-hand knowledge of what happens in Clearwater during those horrifying 18 days, but one account they have hints at a terrifying possibility. During an excursion into Clearwater, the Foundation managed to collect a diary belonging to a woman named Margaret Lane. To the best of our knowledge, Margaret Lane no longer exists. But if the contents of her diary aren't to be believed, then what goes on in Clearwater during SCP-3300 is far worse than we ever imagined. Margaret first started her diary not long before SCP-3300's 1995 iteration began. She was in the middle of a tumultuous time in her life, freshly clean from alcohol and drug addiction, forced to live with her antagonistic mother, and having peculiar and distressing dreams. In the first dream Margaret recorded, she was someone else, a woman living in a small hut perhaps a century ago or more. It was plague time. She was looking down upon her daughter, bedridden, her skin covered in painful-looking red blotches. Her husband was already dead. That's when another man enters, a healthy man. He tells her that he's found their salvation, and then the dream ended. Margaret woke up to a gray, dreary day. There were clouds on the horizon. The rain was coming. It drizzled for the next few days before getting more intense, as one would expect from an SCP-3300 cycle. Of course, nothing seemed out of place to Margaret. Life carried on. She continued to stay clean, resisting the offers of her old dealer, though her relationship with her mother remained frosty. The rain started to get worse as voices on the radio insisted that conditions would continue to become more severe over the next few days. They tried their best to maintain normality. Margaret invited some friends, Jared, Sam, Mike, and Isabel, to come over and play D&D at her place. That was when all hell broke loose. While the group roleplayed, there was a furious banging at the door, like whoever was knocking was trying to bash the door down. When Margaret's mom opened the door to investigate the commotion, she saw that an entire family was standing there, a father, a mother, and 2 young children. The father immediately began furiously asking why all these strangers were in his house. When Margaret's mother tried to tell him that this wasn't his house, he became increasingly agitated and walked straight into the home. Margaret's friends attempted to subdue him, but he threw them off, displaying a supernatural strength. Margaret's mom ran in with a golf club and struck the mysterious man in the chest. There was a nasty splat, but he didn't seem to react. The golf club was just embedded in his chest, having broken the skin and sunken in, but there was no blood, just dripping water. The father then pulled the golf club out of his chest and began beating Margaret's mother to death with it, all while repeating "my house" again and again, while his wife and children watched with broad, sunny smiles in the rain. Somehow Margaret knew that her mother was beyond saving, and that there was no way of defeating these things in a physical confrontation. All they could do was run out to Jared's van with the rest of the group and hightail it to the police station. But when they arrived at the station, the doors were barred and it appeared empty. As the torrential rain hammered down from above, there was nothing left to do but drive out of town and try to escape whatever madness was going on here. But that was easier said than done. They drove for what seemed like hours on end as the rain and the howling wind persisted. Jared had been injured during the fight with the strange family, and his health deteriorated further as the drive stretched on. They should have left the town of Clearwater a long time ago, but it seemed like they were nowhere. It wasn't long before Jared was lying dead in the back of the van, and now there were only 4 of them left. They kept driving, afraid, grieving, hungry, and tired, and Margaret took the opportunity to sleep. It was no time to rest, but she was so exhausted that she had no choice. Margaret had a continuation of her earlier dream. The different her, the dream her, was laying the plague-ridden body of her daughter in the river. But she wasn't the only one. All the villages of her settlement were placing the bodies of their dead in the river as the water washed around them and through them. The bodies became one with the water, and then they became the water. The water was everything. When Margaret awoke, it was to the horrifying sounds of bubbling and boiling. That's when she saw that Jared's body was dissolving. No, not dissolving, evaporating. It was bubbling and convulsing like it was made of water until the entire thing burst into a cascade of hot steam. After that, Margaret and the others left the vehicle and refused to get back inside. Nothing was making sense. It was like something out of a nightmare. As they walked, the rain hammered down upon them. They couldn't have been walking for more than a mile when they crashed into something. It was a sign, "Welcome to Clearwater." It was like that the town itself had drawn them back. Mike refused to return to the town of his own free will and began walking in the other direction. Moments later, he was walking back towards them in silence, though he never intended to. SCP-3300 had distorted his path and brought him back. It was clear that Mike was shaken to the core by the experience, but they had to press on. They would head to the grocery store for food, and then to a sporting goods store where they could hopefully grab some guns to fight the violent, altered people who'd somehow appeared with the rain. But things didn't go to plan, or what little plan there even was. Mike shot himself on the first night at Dirk's Sporting Goods, leaving only Margaret, Sam, and Isabel alive. Perhaps one of the most terrifying details of Mike's death was the fact he didn't even bleed. Instead, the gaping exit wound in the back of his head was just full of water. Water was all that seemed to be left of them. Sam, seemingly driven to the edge by the sight of Mike's death, grabbed a hunting knife to perform an experiment. She'd cut it into her own skin, and was horrified to see only water dripping out. They'd all been changed, and they didn't know why. That's when the survivors noticed something else. There were people standing outside in the rain, hundreds of them. Not a single one they could recognize. All new people, waiting. Sam said only one word, "outside," before walking out of the hunting goods store and disappearing into the crowd and the rain, never to be seen again. Margaret mused that perhaps in the end, she had the right idea. To be taken, killed, erased, or changed would be inevitable. In the final entry in Margaret's diary, dreams blend with reality as her mind finally gives out from the terror. She realizes in her final moments that there is no way out. There is no escape. There is only water. Water is eternal. The rain is eternal. All will be changed. And given the fact that no trace of Margaret was ever found save for her diary, all her fears turned out to be right. She was taken and replaced by SCP-3300, just as will inevitably happen to all the current citizens of Clearwater the next time SCP-3300 rolls around. It will be as inevitable and as indifferent to those it affects as tomorrow's sunrise. You cannot change the rain, but believe us, in Clearwater, Montana, the rain can change you.
Dr. Blast and his group of researchers stand behind bulletproof viewing glass. They all have very serious looks on their face. That is until the first test begins. On one side of the test room, a Class D subject stands holding a sheet of paper. On the other side sits a bright red tomato on a wooden table. Dr. Blast pushes the intercom button and speaks into the microphone. "All right, you may begin." D5041 nods and looks down at the sheet of paper in his hand. He begins to read. "Is a hippopotamus or really just a cool opotamus?" Nothing happens. D5041 stands there awkwardly waiting. A man next to Dr. Blast in the observation room snickers. Dr. Blast jerks his head toward the researcher and stares him down. "This is not a laughing matter," Blast says. The reprimanded researcher clears his throat and stands up straight. "Sorry, sir." Dr. Blast leans over and pushes the microphone button again. Proceed to the next joke, D5041. The man on the other side of the glass nods and pulls a second sheet of paper out from behind the first. "What's an archaeologist? Someone whose career is in ruins," says D5041. A moment after he finishes the joke, the ripe red tomato launches itself off the table and flies toward the face of D5041. The tomato is clocked at moving 104 miles per hour. D5041 has no time to move before the tomato slams into his nose, instantly breaking it. The men in the observation room behind the bulletproof glass do their best to hold back their laughter. Dr. Blast grumbles as he jots down notes on his clipboard. It appears that SCP-504 has a certain taste in jokes. he says to the rest of the researchers in the room. This elicits a slight chuckle. This might indicate sapience. I hope not. Clear the room and bring in the next subject. Medical personnel and a team of custodial staff enter the room. The physicians tend to D5041's nose and carry him out. The custodians clean the remnants of the tomato off the floor, walls, and ceiling. They exit, leaving the room completely empty. A moment later, the door opens and another ordinary-looking tomato is brought in and placed on the desk. The SCP agent who brought in the tomato leaves. D5042 enters the room a moment later with a sheet of paper in his hand. He stands on the far side of the room away from the SCP-504 tomato sitting on the table. He nervously brings the paper close to his face to read what's on it. 3 tomatoes are walking down the street, D5042 says with a little shake in his voice. He had seen D5041 exit the room just before he entered, with blood and tomato paste running down his face. A papa tomato, a mama tomato, and a little baby tomato. Baby tomato starts lagging behind. Papa tomato gets very angry, goes over to the baby tomato and smushes him and says, "Ketchup." The new SCP-504 tomato immediately goes flying from the table straight toward the joke teller. This time, the tomato is clocked at 264 miles per hour when it slams into the face of D5042. The impact immediately renders him unconscious. After the first few trials, Dr. Blast decides that it's time to take things up a notch. The Foundation has collected hundreds of SCP-504 tomatoes, so there is no shortage. After the room is cleaned once again, a medical team removes the unconscious Class D personnel who was knocked out by the previous SCP-504 experiment, and they're ready to begin again. This time, there will be terrible consequences for their actions. D5043 enters the room. The SCP-504 tomato has already been placed on the table. "You may begin," Dr. Blast says into the microphone. The Class D personnel reads the joke on the sheet of paper he's holding. "So I was going to bed and my brother told me, 'Good night, don't let the bedbugs stick their proboscis in your skin and suck your blood.'" D5043 pauses for a beat. "Good luck on a healthy dermis," he ends the joke. For 2 seconds, there's no reaction from SCP-504. Dr. Blast thinks this terrible joke just wasn't one that SCP-504 could understand. Suddenly, there's a loud crack. D5043 falls to the floor. Tomato covers where his face once was. When Dr. Blast and the other researchers go back and slow down the video, they witness the SCP-504 tomato traveling so quickly that it broke the sound barrier. The tomato impacted the joke teller at an unfathomable speed, instantly killing him. Dr. Blast decides that he needs to be more careful when choosing jokes for the safety of everyone involved. Perhaps a crossbreed between SCP-504 and regular tomatoes will yield different results. After the unfortunate death of D5043, the research team waits a few days before experimenting with new strains of SCP-504. 3 different crossbreeds are brought into the room and placed equidistant from each other on the table. D5044 enters the room. Dr. Blast presses the intercom button and orders him to begin. "If you have dentures, don't use artificial sweetener because you'll get a fake cavity," says D5044. The moment the joke ends, all 3 tomatoes launch toward him at 145 miles per hour. They hit him square in the face. 2 teeth are dislodged, and the test subject is covered in the remains of the 3 squashed tomatoes. "Interesting," notes Dr. Blast. "All the tomatoes reacted in the same way. So now we know multiple instances of SCP-504 will go after the same joke maker." He pauses to think for a moment. "What if we cut up the tomatoes?" The test room is reset. Another SCP-504 tomato is brought in and cut up into quarters. D5045 enters the room and begins his joke. "I tried to walk into a Target, but I missed." All 4 pieces of the tomato speed toward D5045's face. They slam into him at 212 miles per hour. One of the pieces of tomatoes impales itself into his eye, instantly destroying it. The medical team rushes in and removes the howling subject from the room. Dr. Blast writes vigorously on his clipboard. "We're starting to go through test subjects too quickly," he announces. "Let's try a recording and see if SCP-504 will react to that." The research team brings in a new tomato, a CD player, and the Harmful If Swallowed album by Dane Cook. The CD begins to play. During one of the jokes, the tomato launches itself off the table and slams into the CD player, causing both the stereo and the tomato to shatter into several pieces. The tomato was clocked at 167 miles per hour. It would appear that SCP-504 reacts to the recordings as well. "We didn't even have to deal with the damn Class Ds in the first place," says Dr. Blast. He informs his team that since the risk level is now relatively low, they can continue the experiments without him. He leaves the observation room to get some rest. The other researchers look at one another, mischievous smiles crossing their faces as they begin to laugh. The SCP-504 research team sets up 3 new tomatoes and brings 3 Class D subjects into the room. The researchers then retreat back into the observation area and begin a joke over the intercom system while the Class D personnel wait patiently in the room with the SCP-504 tomatoes. "The following news item has just been released," said one of the researchers over the intercom. "Bomb blows hole in Lenin statue." The first test subject finishes the joke with the ending written on his sheet of paper. "Ooh, that's gonna leave a marks," Test Subject 1 says. The first tomato twitches but does not leave its location on the table. The second test subject reads from his paper, "BBC is just stalling the good news." The second tomato leaves the table at 152 miles per hour and slams into the jaw of the second test subject, causing a hairline fracture and a chipped tooth. The third test subject looks at the ending to the joke on his paper and begins to shake nervously. He speaks 2 words which he knows will not end well for him. That blows. The third SCP-504 tomato flies off the table, slams into the third test subject's head, and instantly knocks him out. The test subject is sent to the hospital with a massive skull fracture. The next day, Dr. Blast bursts into the observation room and reprimands the research team. "I thought we just established that recordings work in place of live subjects," screams Dr. Blast. "I know how much you guys hate Class Ds, especially D-504-12, but the poor guy might not ever recover before his termination rolls around. I'm making it clear right now that whoever oversaw this round of testing is getting serious reprimand. The same goes for whoever leaked its video logs to the staff." Everyone is silent. From somewhere within the group of researchers, there's a snicker. Then they all break out in laughter. After this incident, no Class Ds or other personnel are used in research being conducted on SCP-504. The research team wheels in a television playing the Sarah Palin and Hillary Clinton SNL skit. The tomato shows signs of confusion as it flies off the table. Its trajectory includes 3 separate bursts of speed over 200 miles per hour, 2 stretches of motion at normal throwing speed, and 1 unprecedented instance of the tomato moving backwards. This all occurs during the flight of a single SCP-504 tomato during the SNL skit. The working hypothesis is that the tomato was unsure whether to take the video seriously or not. The research team later finds out that SCP-504 really hates science and mathematics jokes when they bring in a laptop that plays a pre-recorded engineering joke. Over the speakers, a mechanical voice can be heard saying, "2009 is going to be a complex year. We already know the real part. We still have to find the imaginary part." At the conclusion of the joke, there's a supersonic blast and the computer is completely vaporized by the tomato's kinetic energy. The sensors recorded an approximate speed of 2,174 miles per hour as the tomato flew across the room. The conclusion of the experiments on SCP-504 end with another computer being brought into the test room. The computers begin to play the Monty Python sketch of the funniest joke in the world. Toward the end of the skit, the Allied forces are reciting the funniest joke in the world in German to defeat the Nazis. The actors chant, "When ist das Nunstruck get un Slottermeier? Ja, Bierhund das Oder, die Flippervolt gersput." At the end of the joke, the tomato explodes on the table where it once sat. Debris from the tomato coats the entire room, including the computer. The researchers conclude that SCP-504 did not know what to do with the funniest joke in the world, so it self-terminated. Dr. Blast sits in the cafeteria quietly eating his lunch, reading over the logs for the SCP-504 experiments. Suddenly, a commotion breaks out in the kitchen. There are screams of terror. Dr. Blast jumps out of his seat, runs to the kitchen door, and pushes it open. To his surprise, he sees slices of tomatoes flying around the room. Someone on the research team thought it'd be funny to give the unknowing kitchen staff SCP-504 tomatoes to see what would happen. After they had been cut up and put into food for the day, someone in the kitchen told a bad joke, and the tomato slices flew around like shurikens. Dr. Blast sees a group of researchers peering through a kitchen window and laughing hysterically. He'll get to the bottom of which researchers did this, and they will be fired from the SCP Foundation.
Over 50 men and women, clad in red robes, kneel before an unholy altar. They chant and mutter indecipherable words, words of cruelty and madness, of obsession and sacrilege. Not long ago, these were regular people. Computer technicians, teachers, plumbers, construction workers, accountants. This was before they fell under the ungodly influence of a new ruler. The center of this makeshift place of worship was once a normal school gymnasium, but it's now the home of a huge statue. A humanoid being, wreathed in tentacles. Its head is more like a squid or cuttlefish than anything resembling an actual human face. While he's known to the cultists as the tentacled god, the beast they worship is known to the SCP Foundation as SCP-2662. and he sits in the belly of one of their expansive containment facilities, locked away from the world. But not for long, if his devoted followers have anything to say about it. This is their God, all-powerful and unchanging, and when it comes to springing him from containment, no tactic is too vile or underhanded to get the job done. Their mortal leader and high priest, a man in a purple robe calling himself Brother Marsh, walks among their crouched forms. He whispers instructions for the great day of liberation that's soon to come, providing everyone plays their part. It's a plan months in the making, and one that, if it goes off without a hitch, could free their monstrous god into the world. They would strike at the very heart of their enemy, the SCP Foundation, when they least expect it, and nothing shall stand in their way. How could they lose when they have a god on their side? But why did all these normal people become violent zealots for a squid-faced deity? It all began with a dream. To those who experienced these dreams, they felt more like prophecies, premonitions of the glorious horrors to come. A red sky, billions dead, and billions more enslaved, a dark silhouette on the horizon. Their tentacled god holding dominion over all. At first, it just seemed like a strange nightmare. The ones who experienced it woke up shaken and afraid, hoping to shake the images from their mind, but they couldn't. Every night, the nightmare would return. They'd see the images, the red sky, the dead and enslaved, the tentacled god. And after a while, it would come to them even when they weren't asleep, eventually happening whenever they closed their eyes. Little by little, this scene stopped looking so hideous and started to look glorious. They felt his presence in their minds, slowly pushing them towards their inevitable future. They started to realize that they wanted him to rule over the universe and to experience the honor of serving him. Many of them abandoned their homes and families, leaving their friends and loved ones left to worry that they'd gone insane. In their eyes, they were safer than they'd ever been. They finally had purpose. They were working in service of something far greater than themselves. The influence of the tentacled god drew them closer to one another. They would meet in secret, exchanging information from the prophecies their ruler sent to them in their dreams. They worshiped together, building altars and idols to congregate around. They performed dark blood rituals involving human and animal sacrifice. It was when Brother Marsh, the Anointed One, arrived to guide them towards their true mission that things kicked into high gear. Just 3 months prior, Brother Marsh had been an office drone working in data entry for a large insurance company before the tentacled god invaded his thoughts with a simple message: "Free me, and the new world I create shall be your playground." Since then, he devoted himself completely to the cause, quitting his job and maxing out his credit cards to help fund his new life's purpose, infiltrating the SCP Foundation and releasing his inhuman ruler from its imprisonment. That was the single goal he united the cultists under: freedom for the tentacled god. And at long last, they had all the pieces in place to strike. They'd finally gathered the necessary intel to subvert the will of the most powerful secret organization on Earth. Even the strongest institution is made of people, and people are weak. Unlike the almighty tentacled god, people could be broken. The people in question were Kelly Thompson, Sidney Levitt, Jordan Broche, Dr. Juan Gutierrez, and Jillian Larson. Dr. Juan Gutierrez was a researcher with level 3 clearance on the site where the tentacled god was being contained. Sidney Levitt and Jordan Broche were both security officers charged with verifying personnel clearance on site. Kelly Thompson was a member of site administration with research authorization powers, and Jillian Larson was a research assistant who often collaborated with Dr. Gutierrez. These 5 were the key to getting access to SCP-2662 and bringing their plan to fruition. Normally, personnel dossiers on people working for the Foundation were highly confidential, but the devotees of the tentacled god had their ways. They had a number of computer experts in their ranks, more than capable of hacking in and pulling some basic information off of Foundation servers without being detected. For the other information they needed, they turned to some good old-fashioned torture. which is often the most effective method when you need some quick results. Of course, while the cult's grip on sanity may have been a little tenuous, they weren't stupid. While gathering their intel, they also made sure to find out what exactly they were up against. SCP-2662 was being held in a humanoid containment cell and guarded by on-site Task Force Town 9, better known as the Belligerent Bodyguards. These aren't lazy, donut-chomping mall cops. These are a heavily trained, heavily armed fighting force. Though the cultists had one thing that these Foundation soldiers didn't: the element of surprise. For everything to go off perfectly, Brother Marsh's plans would have to be executed within a single day, and they were already on the clock. Tau 9 had been charged with tracking down any new SCP-2662 cults and dismantling them, and Brother Marsh knew that it was only a matter of time before the Foundation tracked them down and did the same to them. If they wanted any chance of freeing the tentacled god, then they'd need to strike quickly and with overwhelming force. The SCP-2662 worshippers were able to secure the addresses of the 5 key Foundation personnel and station members outside each of them, including one who could realistically imitate each. They waited for night to fall and broke into each of their homes as they slept. What followed was a sequence of ruthless and efficient murders done in the cause of freeing their god. Dr. Gutierrez was shot in the head while he slept. Sidney Levitt and Jordan Broche were both stabbed to death before either even realized what was happening. Thompson, who'd gotten up to use the bathroom, went down in a hail of machine gun fire. Jillian Larson had seen that masked figures were breaking into her home and attempted to flee, but was caught and beaten to death by cultists in her hallway. It was a strange irony that people whose day jobs entailed working with some of the most dangerous and nightmarish anomalies imaginable were murdered in their homes by nothing more than regular humans. So far, Brother Marsh's plan had gone perfectly, with all 5 key personnel murdered within a 2-minute period. Next, the selected doppelgangers stole clothes from their victims' closets and were handed the correct forged documentation. The next morning, each replacement began their journeys to the site where the tentacled god was being contained, while the rest of the cult armed themselves in preparation for their own part in the plan. Nobody at the Foundation seemed to notice anything amiss when the 5 arrived on site. When you work for the SCP Foundation, more mental energy is devoted to following the rules that keep you alive than to memorizing the faces of all your coworkers, and each one slipped neatly into position, disappearing into the familiarity of office life. But infiltrating the site was one thing. Getting past the belligerent bodyguards and into the cell of the tentacled god would be another thing entirely. That's where the rest of the cult would come into play. Heavily armed with whatever firearms they could get their hands on, the rest of the devotees of the tentacled god, Brother Marsh included, would attack the containment site head-on. In the ensuing chaos, the 5 cultists who had already infiltrated the site could take advantage of the distraction and break into the containment chamber. It was perfect. They launched their attack from the outside and from within. When Brother Marsh declared that the time was right, the assault began. A legion of gun-wielding cultists seemed to spring out of nowhere and started shooting up the warehouse that was a front for the containment site. The site quickly mobilized guards and task force members to take on the sudden threat, and just as Brother Marsh had anticipated, the site director called on the majority of Tau 9 to help repel the violent cultists from their perimeter. Tau 9 obeyed, leaving 3 task force members behind to guard SCP-2662's containment chamber. They expected to be guarding the cell from rampaging religious zealots seeking an audience with their god. What they didn't expect was a group of 5 Foundation employees walking right up to them and opening fire, killing 2 Tau 9 members and taking the 3rd as hostage. While the war was being waged outside, the infiltrators had found the tentacled god's containment cell in the low-risk humanoid ward. Their hostage insisted that using him wouldn't give them any leverage. The rest of his team would neutralize the whole group, him included, if that's what it took to stop them. The infiltrators explained that using him as leverage was never their intention. He wasn't a hostage at all. He was a sacrifice. The cultists of the tentacled god detonated explosives, creating a hole in the wall and finally giving them access to their deity. They climbed through and gazed upon him in awe. There stood SCP-2662, twice as tall as a regular man, with 10 huge tentacles emerging from its back. In their months of envisioning this creature, they'd pictured it sitting on a throne made of thousands of human bones, ready to dictate its commands to the obedient liberators. What they certainly didn't expect was to see the tentacled god hunched over a computer screen. Still, gods work in mysterious ways, so they stuck to the plan and began chanting. They pulled out a sacrificial dagger and began sacrificing their captured Tau 9 member. It was at this point that SCP-2662 turned and saw what they were doing with a look of pure horror. He rose up from his computer, his headphones getting caught as he did so. He told them to go away, that he didn't want them here, and that them murdering people in his bedroom like this was inconsiderate and disgusting. The cultists became even more confused. Why wasn't their god accepting their offerings? What were they doing wrong? They tried more chanting and painting arcane symbols on the floor in blood, but this just seemed to make the creature angrier. He told them, in a tone more fitting for a teenage boy than a Lovecraftian god, to just leave him alone so he could play his video games. This was seriously not cool. The cultists were baffled. They told the tentacled god that they were there to free him. He replied that he didn't need saving, that crazy stalkers like them were why he turned himself into the Foundation in the first place. Before the cultist infiltrators could get another word in, the remaining members of Tau 9 stormed into the containment cell and gunned them down with surgical precision. The war outside was already over. Brother Marsh and the rest of the cultists were all killed in the firefight. Tau 9 didn't look the least bit surprised upon entering 2662's cell. This was a common occurrence, unfortunately. They had to deal with an attempted cult invasion every few months, because SCP-2662's main anomalous ability is inspiring violent cults who relentlessly track down and worship it with arcane and bloodthirsty rituals. The problem is, 2662 doesn't do this consciously, and definitely doesn't like the results. That's why he's under the voluntary care of the SCP Foundation, who keeps him amused with video games and reading material, while fending off the deranged cults who try to invade and abduct him. Following the termination of the devotees of the tentacled god, just one of many cults who'd broken into 2662's containment cell, the remaining Tau 9 members apologized to the tentacled creature for the disturbance, allowing him to return to his gaming. They assured him that it'd probably be at least a few more months before something like this happened again. It is an old adage that money makes the world go round, and when you work for the SCP Foundation, that same money can keep the world from ending. Think for a second about the kind of absurd bills that the SCP Foundation racks up. They need to pay for the upkeep on hundreds of facilities while also paying for thousands of employees, as well as stipends for the families of the many members of personnel who are killed in the line of duty. They also need to pay for the equipment required to do their jobs, a lot of which they need to develop themselves, as well as the expenses of varied containment procedures for well over 6,000 different anomalies, each one requiring its own unique treatment. And that's not even factoring in the costs of their various experiments, vehicles, weaponry, and cover-up operations. To say the Foundation would need billions upon billions of dollars to do what they do is probably lowballing it. So today, we feel like asking the big question. How does the SCP Foundation make all this money? Because personally, we just don't think the biannual Foundation bake sale is going to cover the price tag on this thing. First, we're going to explore the different ways the Foundation probably brings in its obscene budget through more traditional means. But if you stick around to the end, we'll explore some of the much more strange and exciting ways the Foundation can financially exploit its vast cache of anomalies, as well as a way that you, that's right, you, can help. So buckle up as we tackle the most terrifying monster of all, budgeting. The most obvious means the Foundation has of scraping up a little extra cash is to cooperate with world governments. Obviously, the SCP Foundation isn't a puppet of the United Nations like the GOC. It operates with a high degree of autonomy that prevents its work from ever being biased by certain national or international interests. However, in order to do its work properly, it does collaborate with various governments across the globe. Naturally, as a result of this, it does receive assisted funding from governments when combating or containing anomalies that would present a threat to their national security. Think of it as a classic you scratch my back, I scratch yours situation. But seeing as people would notice every single government on Earth farming out billions of dollars for seemingly no reason that the profit could account for, it's clear that this only accounts for one of the SCP Foundation's multiple income streams. Where else is all the money coming from? Well, a phrase you've probably heard a lot on the videos on this channel is front businesses. As any members of the Mafia in our audience will already know, a front business is a seemingly legitimate company used to hide the operations of a more secretive or illicit business going on behind the scenes. Typically, it's a boon for organized crime syndicates who need to justify the purchases of certain personnel or equipment or launder ill-gotten gains into clean, legitimate taxable revenue streams. 'Cause trust us, kids, the only 3 letters scarier than SCP are IRS. The SCP Foundation makes use of a huge number of front organizations to both hide its operations and supplement its income, from chemical plants to office buildings to local bakeries. It is impossible to know just how many normal industries technically answer to the O5 Council high enough up the chain. For all you know, you could already be an employee of the SCP Foundation without even being aware of it. Income generated by the various front companies used by the Foundation are likely to make up a good chunk of their budget. Another key factor in the Foundation's profitability is technology. Given that the Foundation has gathered some of the greatest scientific and engineering minds in the world to protect humanity from anomalous forces, it goes without saying that they create some incredible technology, which may later trickle down into wider commercial and civilian use. And before you start saying this is crazy, it's actually an incredibly common practice with regular militaries all over the globe. Duct tape, superglue, GPS, silly putty, EpiPens, microwaves, and the internet were all made possible by military advancements. And with the Foundation having technology so advanced it puts even the most well-funded militaries to shame, it's sure to have some lucrative patents floating around out there. Not to mention the fact that the Foundation has also reclaimed and repurposed anomalous technology that surpasses even their own, which may influence some incredibly profitable consumer goods further down the line. Which is a nice segue to the next portion of this video, utilizing captured anomalies for fun and profit. Well, mostly profit in this case. This is the much more fun and theoretical half of things, where we speculate on which SCPs would bring in the biggest bucks to fill the coffers of the SCP Foundation. And of course, stick around to the end for the most important money-making method of all. It won't be what you expect. First, SCP-096. We know what you're thinking, how do we monetize a mindless killing machine? Simple. We stand someone in front of it and make them look at its face, then position 096 onto a treadmill attached to a series of powerful generators. Given that 096 literally never gets tired, we will have invented a true perpetual motion machine, and the energy generated by this could replace the municipal power grid. That's surely got to be worth a few bucks, right? United States government, the Foundation awaits your call. Okay, let's get a little more serious. Have you ever heard the expression, a penny saved is a penny earned? Because as previously discussed, one of the major costs of the Foundation is labor. However, SCP-662, the butler's handbell that summons the unfailingly loyal Mr. Deeds, could solve this issue. You may be thinking, sure, Mr. Deeds can replace the labor of a couple people, but not that many. He's got physical limitations. To which we would answer, what about SCP-662 put through SCP-914 the Clockworks on fine? We'd wager that this might lead to a bell that summons an even more effective Mr. Deeds, or better yet, multiple Mr. Deeds. You could only imagine the money the SCP Foundation would save. Upon request, he can also manifest bricks of pure gold. He's a butler that literally pays for himself. But enough about Mr. Deeds. Let's talk about you. Are you happy? Fulfilled? Do you know why you're here? A lot of people struggle with finding a sense of purpose in life. It can make it difficult to form and actualize your goals. If only it was easy to know your greatest desire, so you could finally get your life together and start working on it. Thankfully, the Foundation could help. For a price. What? You can't blame them for a little #hustle. With SCP-978, the Desire Camera, they could help people figure out what their deepest desire is. But that's not the only way to make money from this anomalous device. By taking pictures of the rich and powerful and seeing if their desires are compromising, humiliating, or even illegal, you can quickly solicit some very generous donations out of them in exchange for keeping this juicy information under wraps. Podcasts are big these days, with incredibly popular ones like the Joe Rogan Experience getting around 11 million downloads per episode. People love hearing a compelling interview or a good story. That's why, to make a little money on the side, we recommend the Foundation give SCP-1867 a talkative telepathic sea slug who goes by Lord Blackwood, his own podcast, where he would spin wild yarns, interview celebrity guests, and perhaps even host chats with other interesting SCPs. All while the Foundation cleans up on sweet podcast sponsorship revenue. What, are you telling us you wouldn't tune in? I would. SCP-5094, Miss J's WizKid Schoolhouse, could also be converted into expensive, over-the-counter proprietary software. Think of the money that companies like Skillshare and Masterclass rake in. Miss J could guarantee perfect learning through her intensive courses, and once the word of her efficacy spreads, she might even replace traditional higher education. And who would be the financial beneficiary? The SCP Foundation. Then there's SCP-2430, the immortal Hitler clone. He's unable to die, but feels pain at a heightened degree of sensitivity than most normal people. He's also, well, no getting around this, Hitler. And if the Foundation were able to go public about the existence of this clone, they could also take him out on tour across the globe and charge $10 to $15 to punch him. People would be lining up to take a crack at the ex-Führer, and the Foundation would, of course, be the sole financial beneficiaries. Now, let's talk about pizza. The most popular pizza chain in the United States as of this writing is Domino's, with annual revenue of just over $14 billion. What we're wondering is, why doesn't the SCP Foundation want a slice of that lucrative pizza pie? After all, they're in possession of SCP-458, the never-ending pizza box. With the help of this bad boy, capable of producing nearly limitless quantities of pizza, they could surely start making a pretty pepperoni penny. Lego products are also a multi-billion-dollar industry, pointing towards a clear desire in the market for these charming, colorful blocks. And there's no Lego like SCP-387, the living Lego. Hardcore Lego enthusiasts all over the world would pay through the nose to experience a product like this. And seeing as they're completely safe, in both SCP nomenclature and the more colloquial sense of the phrase, the Foundation wouldn't need to worry about any lawsuits from concerned parents. They'd only need to worry about where to put all their fancy new stacks of cold hard cash. For those desiring a little escapism, the Foundation could rent out SCP-1230, A Hero is Born. This book takes its readers on fabulous bespoke dream adventures through fantastical lands, and will surely give them an experience that will last long after they finally wake up. In a world where people are willing to pay top dollar for VR experiences and creepy Facebook metaverses, being able to enter the wondrous land of dreams is a welcome low-tech solution that would still likely make the SCP Foundation boatloads of new income. However, we live in a stressful world. Modern life has come with its wealth of new personal issues, from work troubles to the dating game, and connectivity has come at the cost of having an ever greater awareness of the troubles that plague the world at large. With costs making a lot of valuable therapy and medications unavailable to many, it's no wonder that we're undergoing a global mental health crisis. But the Foundation has a solution: SCP-999. Spend long enough time with him and he'll straight up cure everything from depression to PTSD. People all over the world would pay top dollar to achieve an immediate and effective cure to all mental maladies that only takes a few hours and has no negative side effects. Like the ultimate therapy dog, the Foundation would be rolling in the dough from an opportunity like this. And, of course, the most devious, ingenious, and overall effective method that the SCP Foundation could possibly use to make money is creating YouTube channels that pretend to just be sharing the fictional monsters and entities of a made-up online fiction project, when in fact, they're actually secretly leaking the highly classified secrets of their own organization, while selling adorable, high-quality merchandise of some of the most lovable and iconic creatures. We can't think of any method more valuable than that. Anyway, on a completely different note, did you know that you can get your very own adorable SCP-999 plushie pictured here looking cute as all heck? All you need to do is visit www.scpswag.com and you can have your very own tickle monster to hug anytime you please. And of course, if there are any other highly profitable anomalies you'd like to see in plush form, do take the time to make your suggestions heard down in the comments. Now if you'll excuse us, we need to head off. After all, time is money.
The dual rotors of the Mobile Task Force Chinook buzzsawed through the scorching Ethiopian air. In its belly sat 10 of the most elite soldiers in the Foundation's roster, packing H&K assault rifles, 9mm, and grenades on their state-of-the-art body armor. They were well-equipped, well-trained, battle-hardened, and most of all, lethal. And within 2 hours, 9 of them would be dead. Their case officer stood before them, yelling the brief over the roar of the Chinook's engine as he read from his clipboard. This is not extraction. This is not recon. This is extermination, he said. Our contacts in the CDC reported an entire team of specialists going dark on them in this mine, you hear? They thought they were here to investigate some documented bloodborne pathogen. Ebola, Marburg, something like that, till they received their last transmission from the research team. The case officer reached into his jacket and pressed a button, activating the sound of the transmission over the Chinook's internal speakers. It sounded like little more than incoherent screaming, with the sounds of yelling and growling in the background. Even the soldiers seemed a little uncomfortable hearing it, and after about 10 seconds of the cacophony, the case officer switched it off. It goes without saying that anything still alive down there probably shouldn't be, he said. You know your mandate. Expect the unexpected. Get the situation on lock, and send the pertinent data and samples back to the site. Secure, contain, protect. You hear me? He was answered by a well-practiced chorus of, "Sir, yes, sir." The Chinook landed shortly afterwards, in the close vicinity of an eerily quiet mining facility. According to the information they'd intercepted from the CDC, the outbreak of the mysterious and extremely infectious pathogen had begun a few days ago. One of the miners had accidentally wounded himself on the side of a mine shaft, drawing blood. This allowed some dormant spore system deep in the earth to enter his bloodstream and began rapidly mutating, creating symptoms similar to the common cold. But soon, it became increasingly severe as the number of infected miners increased. All the infected were bleeding through every orifice and collapsing in the dirt. It seemed that while the CDC hoped they'd be up to the task of containing the situation, they'd been just as susceptible as anyone else. But that didn't explain the growling and screaming on that file. The team entered the facility, finding considerable deposits of blood and several dead bodies, all of which seemed to have expired after being infected with the pathogen. The team was silently grateful for being furbished with the Foundation's most advanced hazmat technology inside their tactical armor, as they exited the facility into the dark and twisted shafts of the mines themselves. There, predictably, they found more bodies, but not all of them seemed to have died from the pathogen itself. Some of them displayed clear wounds, seeming almost like they'd been eviscerated by some powerful predator. Could it have been wild animals invading the mines to feast on the carcasses of those who died from the pathogen? Seemed unlikely. Something much stranger was going on here, and the process of finding out what would leave most of them dead. Soon they reached a large chamber in the mine shaft, where it seemed that the path further had collapsed in a grand pile of rubble. There were scorch marks on the rocks and discarded dynamite boxes scattered around. It gave the impression that the miners and researchers had blown one of the passages to stop whatever was down there advancing further, getting closer to escape. But what? The team received an answer to their unspoken question moments later when one of them screamed. A huge bat-like creature, wearing the remnants of a miner's uniform, descended from the ceiling of the chamber to grab one of the soldiers, dragging him up into the dark. As the rest of the team began to fire, their muzzle flashes revealed that the ceiling was covered in them. The creatures began screeching and flying down towards them, ripping and tearing. And when it seemed like the team might have some hope of fending the Bat People off with gunfire, the ground rumbled and began to break beneath them. Huge claws reached out of the earth and pulled them into the ground, where eyeless humanoids in the same tattered miner's uniform began to feed on their flesh. Bat People above, Mole People below. Was this what had become of the miners who hadn't died of the infection? Was this how they'd survived the explosion in the tunnel? The youngest member of the team, seeing everyone being shredded around him, didn't stop to ponder this. Instead, he pulled off his grenade belt, activated every single one at once, and ran out of the tunnel at breakneck speed. He heard the boom and tumbling rocks behind him, sealing all those nightmares and the last hopes of his brothers in arms. It didn't take long for the Foundation to send in reinforcements to the disaster site afterwards, with the first priority being to collect some of the infected blood for further study, seeing as what they were dealing with here was so beyond anything that the CDC had ever dealt with. With samples of the pathogen in containment, Dr. Bradbury was made the lead researcher on the case, with the anomaly being assigned the designation SCP-016. A fascinating wrinkle to this story unfolds when you consider just how low this designation is. We're not talking about the advanced anomaly fighting machine the Foundation is today, but the Foundation in its infancy, before it even had 20 anomalies in containment. And back in those days, the risk ran high that every new anomaly they fathered might just be the one that doomed them all if they didn't play their cards right. And how would Dr. Bradbury play those cards? In meeting with his site director, he was given the brief. Initially, based on the reports we intercepted from the CDC, I believe we were dealing with a simple but highly virulent hemorrhagic fever. Now it seems this was a more optimistic projection than we'd hoped. Dr. Bradbury cocked his head. Then what exactly are we dealing with here, sir? The site director exhaled and took a long pause. This pathogen has developed an extraordinary self-defense mechanism when its host is confronted with an existential threat before reaching full maturity. This goes beyond mere aggressive and evasive behavior, Bradbury. We're looking at evolution. It now falls to you to see just how evolutionary potent our new charge is. So, no pressure then. Dr. Bradbury requisitioned a few samples from containment in order to conduct experiments with D-Class personnel, feeling his nerves mount further when he saw just how severe the containment procedures were. This was a Keter-class anomaly, named after the recently deceased Dr. Keter, who died in the process of containing the Foundation's very first anomaly. Any researcher who misused samples would either be terminated or immediately demoted to D-Class, depending on the present risk. If the samples infected personnel on site, the site would be quarantined. If the infected individuals weren't contained and terminated within 48 hours, official orders were to activate the site's nuclear reactor, overloading it, and killing everyone inside before the pathogen had a chance to meaningfully evolve. The instant death of thousands of Foundation personnel would be a worthy sacrifice compared to what would happen if ever the pathogen got out. In order to conduct the first set of tests, Dr. Bradbury ordered the construction of a chamber that could be filled with water at any rate of speed. Essentially, a Foundation-approved drowning machine. If an existential threat applied before the pathogen could reach maturity would force evolution, then an existential threat he would provide. The first D-Class was infected by SCP-016 and soon began to develop the classic symptoms: itchy eyes, runny nose, coughing, and bodily aches. Something that, to the uninitiated, would seem almost like the common cold. And who knows how many people the average person would interact with the infected during the course of their blissful ignorance. A pair of site security officers in impenetrable hazmat suits dragged the infected D-Class into the drowning chamber, which began to slowly fill with water. "Hey, Doc," the D-Class said over a hacking cough. "Looks like your room sprung a leak. Little help in here?" Help would not be coming. Instead, Dr. Bradbury and his fellow researchers filled the chamber over the course of 24 grueling hours, something that in a facility under the watchful eyes of the world's government would consider a form of torture. But it would not be the water that killed this man. As the chamber started to fill, the pathogen in his bloodstream began to rapidly adapt his body to the new situation, with teratomorphic adjustments to his body. Unlike the bat and mole creatures in the caves, the man began to grow gills so that he would not drown. His limbs twisted instead into primeval-looking fins. His eyes, which would only be a hindrance underwater, withered away and was replaced by a cetacean echolocation system. By the 24-hour mark, he was swimming through the waterlogged room, barely even recognizable as human. He remained in that state for 2 weeks, his behavior staying relatively consistent the whole time. After all this, Dr. Bradbury had the room drained, killing the subject via asphyxiation. To reduce the risk of infection, no autopsy was conducted, and the body was instead burned. The pathogen had clearly changed its response based on the environment, but the question now was whether the pathogen had fixed forms in response to different stimuli, or if every infected individual would react in an entirely unique way, even when faced with the same life-threatening stimuli. Knowing the answers to questions like this would allow all of them to prepare better contingency methods against the pathogen's spread. Just as before, a D-Class was infected with the pathogen, and Dr. Bradbury and his team waited out the incubation period to ensure that he was fully infected. Thus far, anyone with blood-to-blood exposure to the pathogen had been successfully infected without fail, and this D-Class would be no exception. He was then dragged into the drowning chamber, and being competent scientists, Bradbury and his team began filling the chamber with water over a 24-hour period, exactly as they'd done before. Once again, the D-Class began to mutate, but it was different this time. Rather than taking on any aquatic qualities, the D-Class instead experienced a massive and sudden growth in muscle mass, causing him to take on freakish physical proportions to accommodate his newfound super strength. The bones around his knuckles also began growing out, transforming his hands into monstrous bone gauntlets. With his new strength and reinforced fists, He began to pound relentlessly on the reinforced steel door, attempting to smash his way out even as the act of doing so damaged him physically. Dr. Bradbury and the researcher team gritted their teeth, praying that the steel door would hold long enough to eventually drown the mutant. They got their wish, and the D-Class ultimately drowned. But the results were fascinating. It seemed that the pathogen had rolled the dice on a different mutation this time and lost the draw. Dr. Bradbury worried the next time they might not be so lucky. But all the same, he found it terrifying and fascinating that the mutations didn't bear any physical similarities despite the input stimuli being exactly the same. So he had no choice but to continue the tests. A third subject was a D-Class with a background in chemical engineering, who used that knowledge for evil when he fatally poisoned his wife after suspecting that she was engaging in an affair. This seemed relevant, given that both of the previous D-Classes were men sentenced to death after committing murders in the course of armed robberies, and Dr. Bradbury was curious whether the difference in skills and lifestyle would result in an alteration to the mutation, and he was right, in the most terrifying way imaginable. When this D-Class was placed inside the drowning chamber, following infection and gradual immersion, a strange organ with 2 hollow tubes began to develop on his chest. When the water level rose, the organ began absorbing water and slowly growing bigger and bigger. Dr. Bradbury, who actually had a background in chemical engineering himself, had an eerie premonition that this would soon become extremely dangerous if he didn't put a stop to it. So the order was given to a member of security to enter the chamber in a hazmat suit and put a bullet in the test subject's head. In the following autopsy, Dr. Bradbury found that his fears were all well-founded. The organ that the D-Class had developed was deriving oxygen from the water and mixing it with a chemical similar to acetylene. For those unfamiliar with chemical mechanics, this is the exact composition of chemicals used in arc welding. Had the experiment been allowed to continue, chances are that it would have a much more fiery than wet end. Even though the threat was averted this time, it uncovered an unsettling revelation. Perhaps this pathogen was far more intelligent than any of them had first imagined, seeing as it was able to draw upon not just biological memory, but the specific memories and expertise of the person it had infected was not a good sign for the human race if ever SCP-016 managed to breach containment and enter a major population center. The team couldn't help but feel the mounting pressure for results as they moved to the next critical test. Now Dr. Bradbury wanted to see whether it was at all possible for a victim to consciously direct the nature of their transformation without applied existential threat from an external source. To that end, a D-Class was infected with the virus and taken to a different secure chamber. Here, Dr. Bradbury didn't create a life-threatening situation, and instead instructed the subject to focus on forming wings, just like the winged humanoids that the mobile task force had encountered in the Ethiopian mines. Despite following the instruction, no mutation occurred, and the subject died of severe exsanguination from all the bleeding caused by the normal progression of the virus. It seemed that the existential threat really was necessary to stimulate transformation. That, at least, seemed to be a positive. Wanting to test again whether conscious thought could direct the nature of the transformation, a D-Class was infected with the pathogen before being locked into a large crate, hanging from a hook of a crane far above the ground. A powerful explosive was fixed to the outside of the crate as a contingency, in case it developed a mutation that allowed it to break containment during the test. Once again, Dr. Bradbury instructed the D-Class to think hard about forming wings, because the crate would soon be dropped and he would fall to his death if he didn't develop the ability to fly. However, when the crate was dropped, seeming almost to be an effort just to spite the researchers, the D-Class didn't develop wings. Instead, his arm transformed into an appendage similar to a spider's spinneret. As the crate fell, a powerful thread of webbing fired out of the appendage, attaching to the crane and suspending it in place. At this point, the explosive on the crate was detonated, destroying the subject out of an abundance of caution. All of these tests seemed to confirm a thought that gave Dr. Bradbury and his contemporaries no comfort. This pathogen couldn't just survive, it could think. And nothing is more dangerous and unpredictable than something that can think.
It's Halloween night in Chicago. The stores along Main Avenue are leaving out bowls of candy for the evening's trick-or-treaters. Streets are closed off for the big parade downtown, and young children are running home from school to jump into their favorite costumes. It's a night of harmless, spooky fun for most, but not everyone. A police cruiser pulled up outside of an apartment building on Kenmore Avenue, overlooking the Graceland Cemetery. A pair of seasoned officers climbed out and made their way up to the 13th floor. There had been multiple reports of terrified screaming echoing through the building throughout the night. Was someone getting a little too into the Halloween spirit and watching a horror movie at ear-splitting volume? Or was this something altogether more sinister? The police officers approached the door of apartment 1330B and rapped on the hardwood. "Ma'am, is everything okay in there?" No reply. They repeated themselves, a little louder this time. They could hear movement from within, but still no answer came. That was enough probable cause for them to kick in the front door. The officers swept the apartment, going from room to room, hands hovering over their holsters. Kitchen, nothing. Bedroom, nothing. But the living room was a whole different horror story. To their utter disbelief, a human skeleton was standing in front of them, holding a swath of flayed human skin, still dripping with fresh blood. The skeleton was forcing one of its legs into the bloody sack, as though it was slipping on a Halloween costume. On the floor nearby, a pile of human bones sat atop mangled flesh. The officers gasped at the sight, and the skeleton turned to face them. Without hesitation, it dropped the flayed skin and lunged, wrapping its icy fingers around their throats. The rest was a cacophony of screams and gunshots, which soon gurgled and choked into a terrible silence. An hour later, a team of forensic specialists cordoned off the area while another officer photographed the crime scene. A pair of detectives paced around the apartment, trying to piece together what happened. A pair of armed, well-trained officers strangled with such force that their necks snapped, and across from them was a pile of bloody bones, meat, and human skin. Before the detectives had time to draw any conclusions, a group of black-suited FBI agents arrived and ordered the local cops to vacate the area. They were taking over the investigation now. Don't worry, these weren't agents from the Unusual Incidents Unit here to bungle this case further. They were SCP Foundation field agents, undercover, and actively searching for a certain ornery bag of bones, SCP-3114, a skeleton that the adjectives spooky and scary don't even begin to cover. But first, a question. Wouldn't it be chilly to have no skin on? It's an old nursery rhyme that you might have heard during your childhood. And if you ask our professional opinion here at SCP Explained, we'd say yes, it would be. And SCP-3114 can confirm this from first-hand experience. That's why if ever you run into it, it may leave the encounter wearing your skin. That's right. SCP-3114 is a skeleton so desperate to be just like us, it's willing to skin any human it meets and wear our bloody pelts like a Halloween costume. This probably leaves you with a very understandable question. So, what's his whole deal? And thankfully, we have at least some of the answers to that. After conducting a series of cognitive tests on the anomaly, Foundation researchers concluded that SCP-3114 responds primarily to visual stimuli, with its other senses ranging from muted to non-existent. If something even vaguely humanoid enters its line of sight, 3114 will enter its rage state, making a beeline for the victim and strangling them to death. Researchers believe 3114 chooses strangulation as its favorite murder method because it leaves the skin intact, aside from a few minor bruises and abrasions. And once the victim is dead, it will begin meticulously cutting them open and removing their bones, again trying its best to do as little damage to the skin as possible. SCP-3114 will then attempt to wear the skin as its own, eventually discarding it after wear and tear sets in. In one interaction, subject D-1724, an adult male, entered SCP-3114's containment chamber. SCP-3114 attacked him, reacting with an increased level of aggression when the man tried to fight back. SCP-3114 damaged the body of D-1724 to the point that halfway through removing his bones, it decided that even the skin was beyond salvaging. It discarded the body in the corner of its enclosure, placing sticks and boxes over it in what researchers believe to be a form of pseudo-burial.
Tests on SCP-3114's physical makeup indicate that it is stronger and more resilient than a normal human skeleton, owing to it being made from a far denser material than non-anomalous human bones. During tests, researchers attacked the bones with sledgehammers, power tools, and other means of exterior impact, concluding that it took up to 3 times more force to break one of the Anomalies' bones than those of a normal person. SCP-3114 also has regenerative healing properties, being able to mend broken bones at shocking speeds, making the creature effectively immortal. Even though SCP-3114 has no musculature or connective tissue of any kind, its skeleton is still somehow to support itself and move independently. When a bone is removed or pulled away from its place, it will quickly return to its original position once a force is no longer acting on it. It also has far greater speed and strength than your average non-anomalous human, despite its lack of muscles. SCP-3114 also seems to have some semblance of intelligence. As an extension of its drive to appear more human, it even has periods of dormancy, where it mimics human sleep. Researchers have placed multiple items in SCP-3114's enclosure to observe how it reacts. These items have included sticks, boxes, tires, and building blocks. A few experiments even involved placing live subjects into its enclosure, often with predictably violent results. Due to the danger of being in proximity of SCP-3114, Foundation researchers use projections of humans to lure it into a smaller secondary containment cell adjacent to its primary enclosure. Foundation staff are barred from entry until SCP-3114 has been locked in this secondary cell. Only then can items be added or removed from its habitat. Mess this up, and you're all but guaranteed a closed casket funeral. Something this strong and aggressive can create considerable containment challenges for the Foundation, so they started exploring a new question. What can pacify this walking skeleton's homicidal wrath? 2 things, as it turns out. The first is finding a skin that fits just right. Researchers placed a freshly deceased male cadaver into SCP-3114's enclosure. Naturally, SCP-3114 began to systematically remove the bones of the cadaver one by one, then place the skin of the corpse over its own skeletal frame. SCP-3114 seemed happy with its new skin, observing itself in a mirror. SCP-3114 studied the reflection from different angles, attempting to smile with its sagging face and mimicking hand gestures one might see in common social situations. Intrigued by this development, researchers sent D-4843 into the chamber to interact directly with SCP-3114. Upon coming face-to-face with SCP-3114 wearing decaying human skin, the human subject became terrified and attempted to leave the enclosure. SCP-3114 persisted in trying to interact with the D-Class, attempting a handshake and even caressing D-4843's face, its stolen skin sculpted into an unflinching smile. The D-Class was not charmed by this. Instead, he wet himself and was allowed to leave the enclosure to change his underwear. SCP-3114 seemed confused by the subject's fear and subsequent departure, waiting by the door for him to come back. It then grew frustrated and looked at itself in the mirror again, this time reacting angrily and violently tearing off its skin, perhaps made self-conscious by the D-Class's reaction to its new face. From that encounter, researchers concluded that SCP-3114 would not immediately attack if it was wearing a skin that it deemed suitable. The second thing that calms this bag of bones is the companionship of man's best friend. That's right, SCP-3114 has a proclivity towards dogs. This was discovered in a series of experiments where the Foundation cross-tested the anomaly with a variety of animal specimens. The first of these animals was a gorilla. SCP-3114 appeared to exhibit some hesitation at first, indicating a level of recognition between humans and our not-so-distant evolutionary cousins. But unfortunately, the confrontation ended violently when the gorilla became agitated and tried to exert its dominance over SCP-3114. This led to a physical altercation where the gorilla was overpowered and killed, though not without breaking one of SCP-3114's ribs first. Thankfully, the second attempt at animal interaction, this time with a border collie, went much smoother.
SCP-3114 took care to be gentle when playing with and petting the dog, and even when the dog attempted to bite one of its leg bones, SCP-3114 did not react in an exponentially violent manner. The pair spent the better part of 2 hours playing together, playing fetch and seeming to enjoy each other's company. It's comforting to know that there are at least some things capable of temporarily taming this stack of murderous calcium. But what happens when it breaches containment? This brings us back to our Halloween crime scene. An embedded field agent in the FBI introduced himself as Special Agent Thomas Seward. He spoke to the local detectives on the scene, showing them a badge they didn't recognize, and asking them to come downstairs to a mobile office outside the building, where they would be debriefed. Members of Mobile Task Force Gamma 5, also known as the Red Herrings, were waiting in this unit to administer amnestics to any members of local law enforcement who knew about the case. They would later also canvass the building for other witnesses and make arrangements to ensure that the body cam footage of the 2 fallen officers would be destroyed. It was also unclear exactly how SCP-3114 escaped containment, but recapturing the subject for the safety of the local population remained of paramount importance. With this goal in mind, Agent Seward mobilized MTF Pi-1, also known as the City Slickers, a mobile task force that specializes in the investigation, containment, and subsequent cleanup of anomalies in densely populated urban environments. Under the guise of the FBI, the Pi-1 members spread across the streets of Chicago in black vehicles, monitoring police scanners for reports or sightings of walking skeletons attacking the civilian population. Meanwhile, several blocks away, SCP-3114 found itself walking past a row of clothing stores. It stopped at the sight of a mannequin modeling sportswear in a window display. Instead of charging at the humanoid figure with lethal intent, SCP-3114 calmly walked into the store and approached the mannequin. It began to study the figure, taking off its clothes and trying them on piece by piece. When it was fully clothed, it assumed the mannequin's pose. It then began to observe itself in a nearby mirror with rapt fascination. A store clerk emerged from the back room, noticing that someone was trying on clothes outside of the changing room. He walked over to offer assistance, but was stopped in his tracks at the sight of this strange new customer and the turn of his bleached white skull. Not long after that, the anomaly left the store, wearing the clerk's skin. As it emerged onto the streets, unnoticed amidst the throng of trick-or-treaters, SCP-3114 took in its surroundings. What a strange new world it found itself in. Then it spotted a nearby group of trick-or-treaters wearing various costumes, most notably a plastic skull mask. SCP-3114 had found its people. Excited by the prospect of another walking skeleton, SCP-3114 decided to follow the group as they sauntered over to a larger crowd, gathering on the main avenue for the annual Halloween parade. Among the many participants dressed as werewolves and vampires and other classic Halloween creatures, SCP-3114 noticed a group of paraders dressed as skeletons, dancing and walking together. People were cheering them on, taking photos and smiling at the spectacle. Perhaps it wasn't so bad to be a bone man after all. And everyone else at the parade had their eyes on SCP-3114. They didn't see it as a violent, anomalous skeleton wearing skin stolen from an innocent store clerk. They saw it as one of the most brilliantly realistic costumes the parade had ever seen. People stared and waved and smiled in awe, and SCP-3114 was loving every bit of attention. Soon enough, SCP-3114 was leading the parade, waving gleefully at the crowds of impressed trick-or-treaters. It walked with the others for several blocks, occasionally picking up fallen candy to throw at the crowd.
Wow, great costume. That looks super real, mister.
Called a nearby 8-year-old, marveling up at SCP-3114.
Do you want to come trick-or-treating with us?
He motioned to a group of 3 costume friends. They were all dressed as members of the Avengers. SCP-3114 turned its bony head, draped in its stolen skin, and followed the eager kids as they began walking from house to house asking for Halloween treats. Watching the children stick out their bags and plastic pumpkins asking for candy, SCP-3114 began mimicking the behavior. It even picked up and started to carry its own plastic pumpkin. Meanwhile, across town, Agent Thomas Seward was notified about a pile of bloody bones found behind the counter in an upmarket clothing store. Only one creature in town tonight could be behind that. SCP-3114. Seward made a call to all available Gamma 5 members, requesting a cleanup on-site and comprehensive amnestic treatment for all witnesses at the crime scene. Seward and his team hit the bricks, searching the surrounding area. He noticed the large crowds leaving the parade, with some adolescents marveling at the amazing costume the zombie-looking guy was wearing. And at that moment, it all came together for Agent Seward. What better place for a monster wearing human skin to hide than in plain sight on Halloween? He mused to himself while unclipping his radio from his jacket. Seward ordered all available agents to converge on the main avenue and search any trick-or-treaters wearing any costume that looked like rotting human skin. They were on the clock. If they didn't get to SCP-3114 before its current skin suit degraded fully, it would claim another life tonight. Meanwhile, SCP-3114 itself continued its night out in public, trick-or-treating with a group of children who were blissfully unaware of how much danger they were in. As they went home to home, the creature's costume started to take on a pallid green complexion as the rot set in. It gave off the most repulsive smell. At some point, flies even began to gather around it. To any ignorant passerby, it was still the most horrifying and brilliant costume they'd ever seen, and whoever was wearing it must have been so committed to the character because they never said a word. As the night wore on, the children each got calls from their mothers telling them it was time to come home. After all the obligatory grumbles, they gave in and did so, wishing their strange, silent friend in the horrifying zombie costume a happy Halloween. This left SCP-3114 adrift, wandering around, not sure exactly what to do with itself. Perhaps it was time to find a new skin. Maybe then people would want to hang out with it again. The anomaly was distracted from its dangerous thoughts by a dog barking on a nearby lawn. SCP-3114 was delighted to find another four-legged friend out here in the wild, and approached to pet the tiny creature as it wagged its little tail. How nice it felt to finally have a familiar comfort again. That's when it noticed one more little boy wandering the lonely streets. A new friend, perhaps? SCP-3114 would follow him and see. Just a few blocks down, SCP agents scoured the streets with flashlights, asking anyone they could if they'd seen someone wearing an eerily realistic costume, with little in the way of success. Agent Seward was in the middle of questioning a man who had participated in the parade earlier that night when he got a phone call from one of his subordinates. Listening to police scanners, agents had intercepted a call coming from a terrified mother who claimed that a grown man in a strange costume had followed her little boy home. The agents immediately made their way to the address, making sure local police were notified not to respond to the call. Upon arrival, they found that SCP-3114 had broken into the family's living room and was petting the family's dog. The skin suit had almost fully degraded now, hanging off the monster's body like rotten bologna. They didn't have much time. Agent Seward had his men surround the building as a containment vehicle backed up towards the home. They couldn't engage SCP-3114 directly without the risk of a fatality. That's why they'd fitted the inside of the vehicle with a projector, just like the one inside SCP-3114's cell, to lure it back into the trap. Soon enough, just as Seward and all the others had predicted, SCP-3114 began to angrily tear off the rotten skin of the unfortunate store clerk. Its bones shone in the moonlight once more, stained with blood. The next person it saw would be dead. So it was extremely lucky that the next person it saw was the hologram of a male D-Class standing deep in the back of the containment vehicle's portable cell. SCP-3114 sped towards the hologram, grasping claws outstretched, so intent on getting its new skin that it didn't even notice the bulkhead closing behind it. Agent Seward breathed a sigh of relief as the vehicle drove off to the nearest containment site. But for him and the rest of his men, the night had just begun. They still had a hell of a mess to clean up, and all this just so that murderous skeleton could have a happy Halloween.
This is a story about an assassin and the man who supplied him the ultimate weapon. And like any ultimate weapon for a deadly assassin, it's the kind of thing that you'll never see coming until it's too late. It all began with a shootout in Atlanta, Georgia, between local cops and what they suspected was a major hub of the local heroin trade. Little did they know, it was actually something so much more dangerous than any amount of common or garden skag, because mere heroin isn't brewed up by Dado. You can probably already picture the scene. Police squad cruisers lined up in front of the remote warehouse, unloading volleys of bullets at the dealers and enforcers. Occasionally, they peek up from windows and vantage points, sometimes returning fire with AK-47s. Clearly, something big was being kept inside this building, or they wouldn't bother deploying this kind of firepower to defend it. Few people, even in the drug trade, were brazen enough to enter open gunfights with the police. They'd heard tips that some kind of chemical manufacturing was going on in there, due to unusual runoff in the water supply. If some dangerous new drug was going to hit the streets of the United States, it was going to originate from here. And in a way, they were right, just not quite in the way they thought. Over time, the shootout began to get out of control. Surrounding police precincts had to send in reinforcements when the criminals inside the warehouse seemed to become increasingly violent. They were no longer engaging in suppressing fire, but instead firing directly at the cops sieging them outside. This was an exceptionally intense shootout, but there was still nothing directly anomalous about it. Well, until drug dealers started shooting fireballs. And no, we don't mean with a flamethrower or some kind of advanced weapon. One of the dealers exited the building, and his arms appeared to set on fire, conjuring up the flame into a glowing, floating orb in his palm. He then tossed it at the nearest police cruiser, causing it to explode instantly and catching several cops on fire in the process. Soon after the flame drug dealer, another drug dealer who seemed to have conjured the power of ice through some anomalous means, stepped out of the compound. He began firing out huge and dangerous shards of ice. Every time one of them struck a target, it enveloped the surrounding area in deadly frost, the kind that could kill you from the sheer low temperatures, or at least cause you to slip and get a nasty graze on your knee. All things considered, the cops really should have seen the lightning manipulator coming next. He stepped out of the warehouse, his body cracking with blue tongues of electricity. He launched chain lightning that fired from cop to cop, zapping them so hard you could see their skeletons flash through their flesh and bones. That was when all of this became a job for the SCP Foundation. They immediately dispatched a few heavily armed mobile task forces, whose superior training and weaponry allowed them to rout the anomalous drug dealers and kill them without any further collateral damage. The remaining cops at the scene were given amnestic treatment and sent home with a cover story. This allowed the Foundation to fully take over the investigation and explore the inside of the warehouse at their leisure. As it turned out, it was actually a goldmine of anomalous materials, some kind of smuggling hub owned and operated by unknown individuals in the anomaly industry. And in the middle of all of this, they found SCP-3521, next to what appeared to be a burner phone. Both were left when the owner clearly needed to escape in a hurry, slipping out of the grasp of the police. The object that would come to be known as SCP-3521 wouldn't look out of place next to an obscene price tag at the supplement aisle of your local grocery store. A bag containing a small handful of golden gel pills, smelling faintly of banana. These were intended to be a deadly weapon of assassination against an unknown target, and it probably would have been successful were it not for Joint Police and Foundation intervention. We know from a series of intercepted text exchanges that the creator of the pills is known as Dado, a mysterious parapharmacologist who's actually associated with a number of other anomalies on the Foundation's roster. And before we get into the insane twist of what this anomaly actually does, we're going to tell you about a few of the others. SCP-3929, also known as Boner Pill by Dado. Yes, you heard that right. No, I'm not going to repeat it for clarity, because everything that Dado creates has a bizarre and unpredictable outcome. This isn't any simple little blue pill. For starters, the pill is brown. And not only does it cause a marked increase in libido, it also massively ages the subject, like a certain beach that makes you old. But don't worry, the aging will wear off as the increase in sexual stamina does. We suppose this could be a good product if you have some very specific fetishes. Then there's SCP-3494, also known as Superlax by Dado. And much like a Supermax, this anomaly will put you in a hellish prison forever. Specifically, if you take one of these proprietary Dado pills while constipated, you will just keep on pooping forever. It's genuinely pretty horrifying to witness, though again, maybe a perfect product for someone with very specific fetishes. The same cannot be said for SCP-3866, another Dado pill meant to aid in sleep. And if you take it, you certainly will sleep. potentially for 3,000 years, which you'll inexplicably be able to survive and won't even age. So if Sleeping Beauty was always your favorite Disney princess growing up, don't worry, Dado's got your back there too. If you're worried about hair loss, that's H-A-R-E loss, not H-A-I-R loss, you'll love SCP-3802, Hair Growth by Dado. This viscous pink ointment will react very differently depending on the nature of its use. If rubbed onto the head of a bald child, such as one experiencing chemotherapy for cancer, it will cause live adult hairs to grow out of the head of the subject and leap off. There will be no scarring and harm caused to the child. It's honestly pretty whimsical. However, if you're an adult male and you apply it to your head, your body will erupt into nightmarish tumors. They will grow into giant Flemish rabbits that leap off the bodies of the subject, horrifically wounding them and resulting in death. The message here, fellas, is to accept your baldness. You can make it a real look, you just have to believe in yourself. There's also SCP-5604, another pill, lipstick red this time, which will completely rewrite your personality after you take it, and SCP-4193, an anti-headache pill that will shrink your eyes and make you see nightmarish things in the process. And there's even SCP-5185, a dog-sized house spider that Dado sells as a fine dog. And everyone who has one does have to admit, they don't have many flies in their house afterwards. All this is extremely valuable context that lets you understand Dado, a strange, seemingly Eastern European and almost definitely sleazy inventor of pharmaceutical freakery. So when you consider that the pills we're going to talk about today were explicitly designed to kill the person consuming them, it gives you a pretty good idea of just how insane this whole thing is going to be. And things got particularly insane when the SCP Foundation tried to perform tests on SCP-3521 in one of their own facilities, specifically in Site-92, a site in Georgia, USA, which specialized in storing inert anomalous objects. They tested the pills in the lower levels of the building for the sake of safety. They had no idea what effects the pills would have on anyone ingesting them. There were even reinforced walls that could subdue any escape attempts if the pill caused the subject to become a highly aggressive monster with superpowers. What actually happened, as it turned out, was so much stranger. When the D-Class took the pills, he began to complain of extreme stomach pain, followed by bloating and nausea. He asked for medical treatment, but the researchers ignored him, waiting to see what would happen next. Ironically, most of the very same scientists would soon be dead. So what goes around really does come around in the end. After 30 minutes of increasing pain, he almost immediately exploded in a flurry of bananas from within. Millions upon millions of bananas, each one piling one on top of the other, creating a tide of yellow death that rapidly consumed the lower levels of the site. And it didn't stop there. As the volume of bananas increased, the very walls and ceilings began to buckle under the increase in pressure. A yellow tide, unstoppable and deadly. Anyone who didn't get out of the base in time before the bananas reached critical mass was doomed. As the base collapsed in on itself, 23 members of research staff and 62 members of additional staff were dead. Most of them had been crushed by the terrifying banana onslaught, but some had died of acute radiation poisoning. You see, the potassium in each banana is ever so slightly radioactive. Taken on its own, the radiation of each banana is harmless to a human being. However, the number of bananas that burst forth from the very dead D-Class numbered in excess of 50 million at least. The estimated total weight of them was 9.15 million kilograms. Staff members from the nearby Site-17 got an alert on the Foundation switchboard about the excessive amount of radiation detected at Site-92. Mobile task forces wearing radiation protection gear were immediately dispatched to assess the situation. They assumed that it must have been the result of the on-site nuclear reactor core overloading, and never once expected that the pile of hellish yellow rising up in the Georgia horizon as their choppers moved in. The surviving staff were evacuated and treated for radiation sickness. Little by little, each of the other anomalous objects were moved out of the base, and then Site-92 was decommissioned entirely. It's now known within the Foundation as the Site-92EX Biohazard Waste Site, all because they made the critical mistake of underestimating those little yellow pills, which are now themselves buried under the mass of bananas at the former site. If the pills had ever reached the assassin's intended target, who knows what chaos and strife would have unfolded across the globe. Every nation on Earth might have become a banana republic. The mere sight of a minion from the hit Despicable Me franchise could evoke waves of severe and debilitating PTSD attacks. The following is the intercepted conversation between the mysterious assassin and the even more mysterious Dado. It is taken directly from the text logs of the burner phone that the Foundation took from the site of the shootout. The conversation begins with the assassin saying, "New job is in. I need something from you." Dado replied, "What you looking for?" The assassin said, "When I worked with Lil B, he usually got me plutonium." Dado immediately cut him off with, "No plutonium." When the assassin asked, "What?" Dado justified his position with, "Plutonium too easy to trace. Need to be discreet. No plutonium." The assassin, a seemingly open-minded chap despite the whole murder-for-hire thing, asked, "What do you have in mind?" Dado provided the answer, "Potassium." This won him the baffled reply, "How is potassium any more discreet than plutonium?" Dado was prepared for such a question. He replied, "Easy to hide. We'll use banana." This was where the assassin revealed his lack of botanical knowledge, asking, "Bananas are radioactive?" To which Dado replied in the affirmative with a simple yes. The assassin, still proving himself to be open-minded, asked, "How many bananas will you need?" Dado assuaged any concerns he might have at this point, saying, "You let me worry about that. When you need." The assassin opened up here, saying, 415. "I know you're supposed to be some kind of savant, but I don't know about this. Are you sure that radioactive bananas are more discreet than plutonium? Because I feel like they aren't." These issues raised did nothing to shake Dado's rock-steady faith in his bananarific assassination plot. Ever the master debater, he said, "You tell me. You see plutonium on ground and you see banana. Which you more worried about?" The assassin saw his point, but still had reservations, saying, "I get that, but again, it's going to be a lot of bananas, right? Or just one really radioactive one." It was clear at this point Dado was beginning to find the assassin's lack of faith concerning. He said, "You need to learn to trust Dado. Banana just as effective as plutonium. Plus, you can't trace banana. Who does finger get pointed at? Grocery store?" Clearly, the rhetorical skills of the mighty Dado had subdued the worst of the assassin's fears. He came back with a much more meek, okay, just wasn't sure. Can't afford to mess up again. And I don't normally work with new guys. And Dado, illustrating that his mastery of the art of conversation is on par with his mastery of the art of anomalous pharmacology, sealed the deal with, "Good. You trust Dado and everything be okay. No worry. Banana even better than plutonium." Now, the big question. Was Dado right on this? We'd like to argue that he was. Plutonium is a deadly weapon of assassination, yes. And like all radioactive weapons, it has a half-life that can make the area dangerous for a period of time after. However, if you want to be sure, and we mean truly sure, that your target is going to die, then forced banana equivalent dose by Dado is clearly the superior choice. If the victim somehow survives in excess of 50 million bananas appearing in their stomach, say the victim was a professional eater such as Kobayashi, they're likely to be crushed under the 9.15 million kilograms of weight. And if, by a major miracle, the assassination target survived that, there is simply no way that they would be able to survive the resulting insane influx of ionizing radiation inherent in this much raw potassium. In the words of a great man, you need to learn to trust Dado.
When they were about to face down all manner of things worse than anyone's deepest, darkest nightmares, Alex and the rest of his team did what they could to keep their spirits up. There was an old song they used to hum whenever heading on missions, the low sound of that tune giving them just a marginal boost to their morale. It never did all that much to numb the sense of impending doom the team all collectively felt, but it was better than sitting in a transport unit in silence, letting the dread get to them. Even though it had been a while since Mobile Task Force Epsilon had been dispatched on their current assignment, and they all had hummed it together as they shipped out, Alex found himself trying to remember the words to that old song. Smile through your fear and sorrow, then maybe tomorrow you'll see the sun come shining through. It was pretty hard for Alex to keep a smile on his face after losing so many of his teammates and seeing what the Grinner had done to them. The trail had gone cold again, much to the disdain of the team's commanding officer. Receiving a number of new sightings and witness reports, the SCP Foundation had sent the remaining members of MTF Epsilon, also known under the codename Tierfing Black, out on another hunt for SCP-4910. The creature had been at large for years now, with every attempt the Foundation had made to capture it ending in grisly, gut-churning failure. 57 separate times they had sent their personnel after this anomaly on the loose, and not all of them had come back. Although Alex often found himself thinking of the ones that had returned, and seeing photos of how they had changed in the after-action reports. Not to mention the bodies. Those that made it back ended up looking virtually unrecognizable as human beings. After having seen what happened to them, maybe it was better not to know what gruesome fate had befallen the ones who were still missing in action, he told himself, keeping that train of thought private. Tracking SCP-4910 brought its own plethora of issues, naturally, or the Foundation would have secured it by now. The creature had some way of interfering with recording devices, rendering them completely useless. And of course, that meant that Tyrfing Black had little to no clue what the monster actually looked like. Given that it disrupted any and all recording equipment, including cameras and audio devices, the task force's hands were somewhat tied. It forced Alex and his teammates to try and locate it through more old-fashioned means, following up on eyewitness reports, a lot of which led them to a dead end. Every now and then, however, one of these sightings would prove to be genuine. The quickest way to tell was usually if a person living near the place where a report came in from had gone missing lately. Civilians were SCP-4910's main source of food, and a recent disappearance in the area, paired with the sighting of something large and four-legged, usually meant that the beast had come out of hiding to feed again.
All right, listen up, team,
Commanding Officer Sawyer announced. With the level of militaristic speed and discipline expected of them by the Foundation, Alex and the other members of the mobile task force quickly filed out of the transport and fell in, ready and waiting to receive their orders.
Now you all know the reason why we're here.
Sawyer strode back and forth, arms behind his back as he addressed what was left of his unit, 3 operatives, not including himself.
Even so, it is imperative you don't forget it either. So these are the facts. Today, the anomaly designated as SCP-4910 is still running wild. But if we have anything to say about it, then that sucker won't be running for much longer.
The 3 troops gave a quick chant in agreement, although Alex kept quiet, just mouthing along. He wasn't exactly sure that they would actually ever catch up to the Grinner. So little footage of the monster even existed, meaning the team still had little to no clue what this thing was, or if they were even equipped to fight it. And then again, a huge part of him didn't want to ever find SCP-4910, knowing what it had done to the fallen former members of Mobile Task Force Epsilon.
So here's the latest,
Commander Sawyer continued, silencing the team.
Approximately 12 hours ago, we received a message from one of the Foundation's field operatives. This agent has been in deep cover living in a nearby town for a number of years.
As he spoke, the commanding officer gestured down the high ridge that they had landed on. Far below, sitting in the center of a huge dip in the earth, was a small township. There was barely enough room for more than a few hundred people at most. All around this small urban center, bordering the entire town in an almost perfect circle, was a dense forest. It was ideal cover for the monster, and Alex could see on his teammates' faces that they all knew it too. With them in the town, there was no way they could cover every possible avenue of approach.
This operative, is he the one that called in the eyewitness report?
One of the team, Warren, piped up and asked.
That is correct, Agent Warren,
Sawyer confirmed.
That agent has agreed to meet us at a rendezvous a few clicks north of here. The 4 of us will circumnavigate the town, stick to the cover of these woods as we head out to make contact with him. From there, he'll guide us to where the creature was sighted.
The team gave little response, just a few low murmurs expressing their collective apprehension. In a strange way, Alex found it comforting that, at the very least, he wasn't the only one having some serious reservations about potentially coming face to face with SCP-4910.
Now, boys,
their commander sighed.
I get it. All of us have been trying to catch this freak for a long while, and we've lost a lot of good people from our unit along the way. But we are Tyrfing Black, you hear me? You all know what that name means. Tyrfing, as the sword from Norse mythology, cursed to kill every time it was drawn. And that's us. That is exactly what we are gonna do when we finally find this monster. For all our fallen brothers and sisters, by the time we're done with it, The Grinner will be smiling out from the other side of its ugly face. Now let's move out, double time!
With a half-hearted cheer, the squad prepared to start their hike through the forest that encircled the town. The 4 survivors of Mobile Task Force Epsilon fanned out, keeping close enough to see and hear each other, but not too close that they were clustered together. The more they huddled up, the easier it would be to take them out if the Grinner was able to get the jump on them. Although he should have been keeping his eyes forward, looking out for any tracks the creature might have left, Alex couldn't help checking over his shoulder. The sun was getting lower and lower in the sky, the day rapidly turning to night. Before long, their visibility would be compromised, severely limited by the lack of natural light. It was then he looked to his fellow team members, Warren and Jones. Besides Alex himself and the squad's commander, they were the only Turfing Black operatives left. Warren had always been the more brash and outspoken of the group, willing to stand up and question the orders of Commanding Officer Sawyer. Alex could tell Warren was having the same worries about this plan as he was. The thick tree line gave them plenty of cover, but could also easily work to the monster's advantage, allowing it to sneak up and get the drop on the team with relative ease. But both Alex and Warren also knew that if the MTF was pushed back towards the town, they would be trapped, like fish in a barrel, just waiting to be picked off by SCP-4910. Jones was walking slightly ahead of the others, his gaze rapidly scanning back and forth across the forest before them. He was the team's most accomplished tracker, meaning he was always on the lookout for anything that could give them a better idea as to where the Grinner was heading, or if it was nearby. From scratches on tree bark, to series of inhuman, unnatural footprints belonging to a large quadruped beast, and, of course, trails of blood or bodies. If there was a sign, Jones would find it. Much like Alex, the other 2 operatives had become more than a little jaded with their ongoing hunt for the elusive entity. But on top of that, not either one of them would admit it to the others. They were scared of it too. The things this creature were capable of were enough to make anyone think twice about wanting to find it. As much to quell his own fear and sorrow, as well as that of his teammates, Alex started humming the tune to Smile, just loud enough for them to hear, but quiet enough, he hoped, to not draw any unwanted attention. It was already dark by the time Turfing Black was beginning to approach the coordinates where they had arranged to meet the Foundation agent. Commander Sawyer had given his troops a silent hand signal, and all of them had lowered their night vision goggles affixed to their helmets. Through the fuzzy green hue of the optics, Jones was the first to spot a figure leaning against a tree, waiting for them in the distance.
Sir,
he whispered to Sawyer, catching his attention and then making a gesture towards the vaguely human shape in the shadows ahead of them. Looking to where Jones had pointed, Alex and Warren could see the agent waiting for them. Following their commander's lead, they paced steadily towards the undercover operative. It was only as they stepped closer that they realized he wasn't moving.
Agent Manning?
Sawyer called out to him, trying to keep his voice as hushed and low as possible. No response. Manning was still, propped up against a tree trunk. The team were a few feet from him now, while the commander stepped up to the agent and turned him around by his shoulder, only to recoil at what he saw. Manning's eyes were open but remained unblinking and lifeless. But that was far from the worst thing that had happened to his face. A huge, disproportionate grin had stretched his mouth wider than was natural. Masses of jagged, uneven teeth had taken root, pushing from under his tongue and the roof of his mouth, filling his airways with thick clusters of yellowy white enamel. There were so many new teeth sprouting from Manning's face that new, fixed and unsettling smiles had started to form, splitting open his cheeks.
Back! Back!
Sawyer told his men in an urgent, hushed whisper.
Remember, boys, we don't know how contagious this thing is.
Given they had never seen it in the flesh, that was true. All previous failed attempts at bringing in SCP-4910 had ended with victims displaying similar signs of some unknown anomalous infection. Whatever it was, it seemed to have spread from the creature itself, causing human beings to overproduce masses of teeth. This started with new clusters of dentins painfully tearing through the mouth until the victim could no longer speak or breathe properly. If given enough time, the teeth would begin forming elsewhere on the body, below the neck in places they shouldn't be. The lucky ones, not that there were many of them, had managed to get themselves medical attention soon after they had been exposed. Within an hour, maybe 2 at best, of an encounter with SCP-4910, there was still a chance of saving one of its victims through intensive dental surgery, but 3 or 4 hours afterward, and it would already be too late. Hearing the distant snap of a twig, Jones turned with his weapon raised, arms locked in a combat-ready stance.
Possible contact,
he declared, aiming his gun into the deep, shadowy forest. Matching his bearing and targeting the same area, Sawyer gave a hand signal to Alex and Warren, urging them to lock and load. Lifting their rifles, they covered the opposite direction, just in case someone, or something, came dashing out of the forest at them from the other direction. For a few moments, everything was still, although certainly not calm in the last part. Feeling a bead of sweat crawl down the back of his neck, Alex lifted a hand to wipe his face clean, the only sound being the low, panting breaths of the 4 MTF agents. That was when he saw a shadow move, just ahead of him, darting between the trees before vanishing from the view of his optics once again. It was at least the size of a horse, far bigger than Alex had expected, and able to move around astonishingly fast on its 4 legs.
Movement this side,
he announced, alerting his teammates.
It's toying with us,
Sawyer muttered.
With respect, how is that possible, sir? Warren asked. It's an animal, isn't it?
It's a hunter, Jones replied.
We need to move. Our visibility's no good with all these trees around,
the commander whispered.
On my mark, we make our way towards the town.
But sir, we'll be sitting ducks down there. It can flank us from any side,
Warren argued.
We're better off down there. At least we have streetlights to help see it coming,
Alex interjected, mainly just making an excuse to get as far away from the encroaching entity as possible.
This isn't up for discussion,
Sawyer said, taking command.
Head for the town, that's an order. On my count, 3, 2,
contact!
Jones shouted. The deafening noise and blinding muzzle flash of his weapon firing quickly followed as he sprayed bullets wildly at the shape that was barreling through the forest towards the team. Alex turned to see what was happening, only for Sawyer to yell at the top of his voice, almost drowned out by the gunfire.
Go and get out of here now!
Obeying his orders, Alex turned his heels and sprinted towards the low orange light of the nearby town, just visible at the edge of the tree line. Warren was next to him, matching his speed, their heavy tactical gear that was strapped to their bodies jostling back and forth each time one foot came down on the forest floor. Glancing back over his shoulder, Alex saw Jones had ceased fire and was running up behind them. Further back was Sawyer, with the Grinner bearing down on him. The commanding officer of Turfing Black had his weapon raised, fingers squeezing down on the trigger. Every round he fired illuminated part of the forest for a split second. Alex couldn't make out the creature in any great detail, not while also running further and further away, increasing his distance from it. All he could make out from this far was a fleshy, quadrupedal mass galloping straight for Sawyer. He was yelling to get SCP-4910's attention, the sound of his war cries carrying over the night air. As the 3 MTF agents broke through the tree line and reached the edge of the forest, their commander's shouts quickly turned into screams of intense pain and unspeakable horror, and then fell silent. Alex wasn't sure if the creature had attacked and eaten him, or caused more of those unnatural teeth to fill Sawyer's mouth, blocking his screams permanently. Reaching the town, every road was completely deserted, gently lit by the dim glow of orange streetlights. Tiny rural stores and independent businesses had their doors bolted tight, rolled down shutters locked up for the night, meaning hiding in one of the buildings wasn't an option. Panting, Alex leaned over and put his hands on his knees, trying desperately to catch his breath.
Now what?
Warren asked, the terror in his voice impossible to miss.
That thing's gonna be here any second.
We need to get away from here as fast as we can and then send word to the Foundation,
Alex answered, speaking between deep, breathless wheezes.
Tell them we need backup, that this thing is too dangerous for only 3 of us to take on.
There may not be enough time for that,
Jones chimed in, standing a few paces away from the others. He had been staring down the long stretch of the street they had stopped at, frozen to the spot, barely moving a muscle. Both Alex and Warren turned to look in the same direction, and there it was, only a few feet away under the light of a street lamp. It was almost like SCP-4910 was waiting for them to catch their breath, intelligent enough to know its hunt wasn't yet over. Alex, having now finally gotten a better look at the monster, instantly wished he hadn't. It made him feel sick, like there was a lump lodged in the back of his throat. The Grinner stood atop 4 pink, sinewy legs, its body just a formless mass of pure musculature that looked like it had been sculpted out of the same tissue that human gums are made from. It lacked a neck, instead having a pair of massive jaws poking out between its front shoulders, a dark, marble-like eye on either side of its head. SCP-4910's wide, almost crocodilian jaws parted, showing off what had earned it the ironic nickname of the Grinner. It presented a gaping maw of crooked, uneven teeth, with more clusters of enamel protruding from its back, elbows, and head. These teeth even formed the hooves it walked on. At this distance, it was hard to tell if the sickening yellow coloring of the teeth was purely because of the streetlights, or that they had been stained and covered in plaque. Alex tried to contain a cough in his throat, his stomach feeling like it was folding over itself at the sickening sight of SCP-4910. He started spluttering, wondering if he was about to vomit, given the lingering feeling at the back of his throat, like the sensation one gets when something is forcing its way up the esophagus, but it was lodged. The feeling wasn't coming up and out of Alex's throat, it was stuck there. By now he was wheezing, desperately trying to breathe through relentless coughs. Jones kept his eyes on the creature, who was pacing slowly towards them now, keeping a distance but moving like a lion encircling its prey. Warren turned and kneeled down to Alex, slapping him hard on the back, trying to help him cough up whatever he was practically choking on. Alex's eyes started going misty, watering up as he gasped for air, still feeling that lingering feeling of being held right at the edge of being sick. In a final act of desperation, he jammed his fingers down his throat, trying to dislodge or dispel whatever was making him gag. That's when he felt it, a cluster of little, solid pieces embedded in the roof of his mouth. Teeth that hadn't been there before, hadn't grown naturally, but had just sprung out of his flesh, and more were growing. Pain filled his mouth, spreading over Alex's entire face as new jagged teeth came bursting through his gum line, overlapping with his natural set, tearing his jaw into a wide, crooked grin. Looking up through his tear-filled eyes, he could see the same uneven smile on the face of the Grinner as SCP-4910 began dashing towards its next prey. Now go and check out SCP-323 the Wendigo Skull and SCP-2086 Man-Eating Bus if you dare to learn more about even more malicious monstrosities, carnivorous creatures, and atrocious anomalies that all seek to do harm to humans.